Chapter 2339. Everyone eat. Why are you all looking at me? Meg picked up a piece of red braised pork with his chopsticks and put it in Amy's bowl. He looked at the ladies who were looking at him strangely. Ever since everyone arrived at the restaurant, their expressions had been strange, as if they were hiding something from him. Nothing. Let's eat. Angela picked up her bowl and chopsticks, lowered her head, and ate quietly. Everyone followed suit, but the atmosphere was still a little strange. Irina also looked at them strangely, wondering what secrets they were hiding. Ha ha ha. To think you would have such a day. It's a pity that there are only words. If only I could get a video. Camilla looked at Meg from the corner of her eye, and her heart was already racing. Boss, did you hear anything strange outside today? Yabamiya asked curiously. Everyone's gazes landed on him, and some of them even glanced at Irina intentionally or unintentionally. Strange words. Meg frowned, and then shook his head. I didn't hear anything strange. I see. Then it's fine. Today's red braised pork is so delicious. Yabamiya put a piece of red braised pork in her mouth and didn't say anything else. Meg was a little confused. He felt like they were hiding something from him. After lunch, Meg opened the door and greeted them with a smile. Then, he met many strange gazes. How should he put it? It was like the whole world knew your secret, but you were the only one who didn't know that you had this secret. The customers entered the restaurant as usual, but they seemed a little more distant than usual. Only Harrison secretly gave Meg a thumbs up when he passed by. What the hell? What's going on? Meg entered the kitchen with a confused look and started cooking for the customers with an inexplicable mood. Have you heard? I have. Who doesn't know now? I didn't expect him to be this kind of man. Yeah, if I had known, I wouldn't have waited until now. TSK. He has such a beautiful wife at home, and he still does this kind of thing. As the old saying goes, what's stolen is better than what's yours. I just pity his wife. Although their voices were not loud, Meg's hearing was really good, so he heard everything they said. However, he was still dumbfounded after hearing the whole story. Who did I steal from? What's wrong with who? What kind of man am I? Meg had the urge to grab someone with his cleaver and interrogate them. Meg was infuriated when he heard that. Irina's gaze gradually sharpened. As a woman, how could she not understand the meaning behind their words? All the way until the end of the day, Meg was still unable to glean anything from the casual conversations of his customers. He only managed to glean the gist of what was going on, which was that there was a rumor circulating throughout Rodu that he was having an affair. Moreover, this news was spread methodically and full of details, so it received the approval of everyone. Irina made her way to the entrance of the kitchen and looked at Meg, who was wiping his kitchen knife, with a smile as she asked, "Shouldn't you explain what's going on?" All of the women who were cleaning up the restaurant immediately fell silent. Even though they were still working, they all pricked up their ears to hear what kind of family tragedy was about to unfold and whether they should help mediate the situation. I also want to ask that question. Meg stowed away his kitchen knife and made his way to the entrance of the kitchen. He looked at the women who were working diligently and asked, "Mia, what do you think they meant by that?" Yabamiya put down the plate in her hand and looked at Meg, then at Irina. She bit down on her lower lip and hesitated for a while before replying in a low voice. "It seems that there are some rumors going around." Say what? Irina asked. Yabamiya looked around her before turning to Angela with a pleading expression. Angela's eyelids twitched, and she tilted her body slightly to avoid her gaze. It's said that the boss is having an affair with a customer, and it's been written into a novel. It seems to be selling well, so it's been spreading like wildfire. Everyone knows about it now. Elizabeth calmly continued the conversation. Huh, there's such a thing. Meg's eyes widened. He didn't expect this to be the cause of everyone's strange behavior. He really didn't expect that there would be people who would spread rumors about him, and that it would be so influential. That would explain why the atmosphere was so awkward earlier. After all, he still had the image of a good man here. Overnight, he became a heartless man who betrayed his wife and had an affair, and the passers-by lost their good impression of him. It's just an author's story, so it's not surprising. It's strange that so many people believe it, isn't it? Meg explained to Irina. Irina didn't respond to Meg's words. Instead, she turned to look at the women and asked, "Who has that book?" "I have it." Angela presented the pink-covered book as if it were a treasure. Isn't this the book she was reading in the park this morning?" Meg raised his eyebrows. He suddenly understood why the book was so familiar. Now that he thought about it, he immediately understood why she was blushing when she was reading in the park this morning. Mr. Mac's incestuous little wife. Irina took the book and read it aloud. What a shameful title. It's obviously written to torment ignorant young girls. Mag furrowed his brows. "Have you all read it?" Irina looked at the women and asked. "No." The women all shook their heads, including Angela. "You haven't read your book?" Irina looked at Angela strangely. I haven't had the chance to read it yet," Angela said, blushing slightly. "Like hell I'll believe you." Meg rolled his eyes and reported, "She was reading this book alone in the park this morning. I saw it with my own eyes." Angela covered her face. She felt like she was going to die. Irina opened the book and casually flipped through a few pages. Her cheeks were also slightly red. She quickly closed the book. "Why are you blushing again? Haven't you read romance novels before?" Meg muttered in his heart, but he still said with a straight face, "Is it full of made-up content? This kind of book, from the beginning of the title, is not worth believing a single word. How can people take it seriously? Public morals are degenerating day by day. Whether it's true or not, read it yourself." Irina threw the book into Meg's hands. "Fine, I'll read it. I want to see what kind of rumors she can make up." Meg took the book and casually flipped to a page. The title was Mr. Max Mandarin Ducks Playing in the Water Shikidru. Meg's expression stiffened for a moment. He silently closed the book. He couldn't read it anymore. If he did, he would be censored. Damn it. It wasn't just a little detail. It was full of details. Chapter 2340. The restaurant was completely silent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on him. "This," Meg muttered to himself. He was sure that the events in the book had never happened. He didn't take a bath in the hot spring with that diner, Little Excion, and even did it 7 times in one night. But this kind of thing, with so many girls present, it was hard to explain. "This is a rumor, a blatant rumor," Meg said with a serious expression. "Correction, this is a blatant rumor?" Angela said. The girls all blushed when they heard this. They had passed the book around in the morning. Although they didn't finish reading it, they still had a rough idea of what was written in the book. No one would think you were mute if you didn't speak. Meg glanced at her and nodded. "Yes, that's it. I didn't expect that a made-up book would actually ruin my reputation. And those stupid fellows actually believe the content of a lowly H novel. Public morals are really degenerating day by day." Mag sighed. He was indeed rather emotional. "So this is fake?" Irina looked at him and asked with a smile. Meg knew that she definitely didn't believe it, but now she was acting like she didn't believe it. He didn't know what she was playing at, but he still said with certainty, "Yes, I'm going to find this author and let her know the consequences of spreading rumors." "Boss, are you going to catch Little Excion?" Mia blurted out. "Little Excion? That's just a fictional character." Meg frowned. He picked up the book and pointed to the pen name. "I'm looking for this Northwest Lone Wolf. Sounds like a ruthless character." "Boss, you have to be careful if you go alone. I'm afraid that this isn't a lone wolf, but a pervert." Angela winked. Which normal man would write such details? "You talk too much." Meg smacked her head with the book. "Ugh." Angela covered her head and took 2 steps back. She didn't expect that a level 8 expert like her wouldn't be able to dodge the boss's casual attack. "All right, let's call it a day." Meg waved his hand, signaling the end of the meeting. "Boss, my book." Angela looked at Meg pitifully, her seductive eyes glistening with tears. She unconsciously cast a seductive look at him. Meg ignored her charm and said seriously, "I'm confiscating it. You are the origin of the restaurant's rumors. You should watch more healthy things in the future. Don't hide in the park to watch such things." "Hey, that's too much." Angela's expression immediately changed. How could a girl say such things so casually? "You don't want to act anymore?" Meg asked. Angela recalled what Meg said a few days ago and immediately swallowed the rest of her words. She glared at him with hidden bitterness and turned to leave. The book was so well written that she wanted to read it again and again to learn some skills. She didn't expect Meg to confiscate it shamelessly. It seemed like she had to buy another one later. The girls also said their goodbyes and left. Do you guys think what the boss said was true? Hannah asked curiously. I believe in the boss's character. It's just that I've never seen him flirt with any female customers in the past few months. It's the same for us, Elizabeth said coldly. Yeah, the boss is a decent boss. If he wasn't decent enough, we would be the first ones to fall for him, Yabamiya said with a smile. The boss's charm is indeed hard to resist. It's really hard to find a man like him, Gina said with a nod. Everyone laughed when they heard that. They laughed and joked all the way back to the dormitory. What do you plan to do now? Assassinate your family? Irina looked at Meg with a smile. She felt like she was enjoying the show. Although he spread rumors about me, he doesn't deserve to die. I guess he didn't expect someone to put him in reality and spread the rumors in such a systematic way. Meg shook his head. There was a hint of helplessness in his smile. How could there be so many stupid people in the world? So we'll just let him be. Just because he doesn't deserve to die doesn't mean he won't be punished. This incident was caused by the first book, so it'll end with this book. I want to find him and let him clarify it himself. Meg smiled and said, As for how to punish him, I haven't thought about it yet. Let's talk about it after we catch him. I'm going out for a while. Meg walked toward the door. You know how to find him? Isn't the book written with the publisher and the pseudonym? Now, there's no internet. Someone must know her. Meg waved the book in his hand and went out. According to the book, Meg soon found the Delmar publishing house in the west of the city. Meg put on a mask in the alley and pretended to be a middle-aged businessman. He tidied up his clothes, put the book in a small bag, and walked toward the door of the publishing house. As soon as he entered the door, Meg was stopped by the receptionist. Sir, do you have an appointment? The receptionist smiled sweetly. She could see that Meg's clothes were expensive. He might be the boss who came to talk about business. Sorry, I don't have an appointment, but I'm here today to talk about a big business with your boss. Can you inform him for me? Meg said with a smile, inadvertently showing his bracelet inlaid with gems. Okay, please wait a moment. I'll inform the boss. The receptionist didn't know where Meg came from. She was worried that her rude refusal would irritate the boss's potential client. After saying goodbye to Meg, she quickly walked inside. After a short while, a short and plump middle-aged man followed the receptionist over. He sized Meg up from afar, and when he went up to him, he said with a smile, My friend, you don't look familiar. May I know what brings you to our publishing house today? Meg took out the book from his bag and said with a smile, Nice to meet you. I'm the boss of the Padar publishing house from Rodu. You must be Mr. Delmar. I'm here to talk to you about the cooperation of the book Mr. Mac's incestuous little wife. I'm interested in buying the distribution rights of this book in the Roth Empire for 2 million copper coins. Delmar was a little confused when he heard the name Padar Publishing House. He didn't remember there was such a publishing house in Rodu. However, when he heard the offer of 2 million copper coins, his eyes lit up immediately. He said with a big smile, Come in, come in. Let's sit inside and talk. Delmar Publishing House was a small publishing house. Although it was a little famous in the circle of H novels, it wasn't very profitable after all. Boss Mag's incestuous little wife could be said to have given them a turnaround. According to the current trend, the sales of this volume would be enough for their company to survive for at least 3 years, not to mention the sales of the previous volumes. Chapter 2341. Meg was sitting on an uncomfortable sofa in an office that wasn't very spacious. He looked calmly at Delmar, who was making tea for him eagerly. It was this man who published a novel about him. Oh no, not just one novel. He had just done a simple investigation. There were already 6 novels about him on the market. 3 of them were from Delmar. The best-selling one was Mr. Mac's indecent little wife. Therefore, Meg didn't like him. He even wanted to give him 2 tight slaps. Delmar brewed the tea and placed it in front of Meg. He then sat down opposite him with a smile and said, Mr. Padel, can you tell me more about the cooperation you mentioned earlier? It's like this. When I went to the bookstore today, I found that the book published by your publishing house was selling well. I bought a copy and felt that the content was good. It was a good book with good quality and reputation. Therefore, I came here according to the name of the publishing house on the cover. I wanted to talk to you about the cooperation and whether I could buy the publishing rights in the Roth Empire. Meg smiled and said, with our Padel Publishing House's capability and channels, we can give you a 50% share of the profits in addition to the publishing rights fee. This, Delmar's eyes rolled quickly. It was actually such a good deal. 2 million copper coins was not a small sum of money to Delma. Although Boss Mag's incestuous little wife seemed to be selling well and had successfully made its debut in the entertainment circle, due to the limitations of the subject matter, it would probably only be able to sell 100,000 copies. After deducting all the costs, they could only earn 2 million to 3 million copper coins. If this god of fortune could give them 2 million copper coins and let him have a bite of the huge cake that was the Roth Empire, that would be great. You think it's not enough? Meg curled his lips, but his voice became colder. It's not at all. Delmar quickly shook his head with a smile and said, you see, this is not a small cooperation. We still have to discuss it properly. I just want to give you some guidance. How many copies of this book do you think can be sold in the Roth Empire? With the quality of this book and Mr. Mac's popularity, it shouldn't be a problem to sell millions of copies, right? Meg pursed his lips. 1 million copies. Delmar's eyes lit up. Even if he earned 30 copper coins per book, 50% of the profits would still be more than 10 million. The Roth Empire's market share is massive. Delma's breathing became a little heavy. This was simply too tempting for him. Most importantly, he could have kept this collaboration a secret and not told Lone Wolf of the Northwest. He could have secretly taken the money and earned another 10 million for no reason. It was not that he had not thought of doing it himself, but in the publishing industry, just having books was not enough. You had to have channels and connections. Otherwise, readers would not even have the chance to read your books, let alone sell them. Okay, it's settled then. Delmar clapped. It's not time to decide yet. Meg took a sip of tea and crossed his legs. Delmar was stunned. He asked, nervously, is there anything else you're not satisfied with? Meg said slowly, it's not that I'm not satisfied with it. After all, this is a big business. I want to meet the author of this book while I'm on a business trip to Chaos City. I want to talk to him about the creative process of this book and his future plans. You want to meet the author? Delmar pondered. He was a little worried that Meg would poach him, but at the same time, he did not want to lose this opportunity. He was a little conflicted. If it's not convenient, then forget it. Meg put the book back into his briefcase and was about to walk to the door. Delmar got up quickly and said with a big smile, of course it's not convenient. Of course it's not a problem if you want to meet the author. I'll go to find the editor in charge of following Lone Wolf of the Northwest and take you to meet him. Oh, I'll go with you. Meg glanced at him as if he was judging his sincerity. After a while, he nodded. Delmar hurriedly went out and wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. Sure enough, the aura of a person who was willing to do business with millions of yuan was different. Boss, it's not very appropriate. Lone Wolf of the Northwest never sees anyone. Last time, when you asked me to talk to her about the signing event, she didn't agree no matter what. This time, if you want to take someone to see her, she definitely won't meet you. The editor looked at the boss with a worried face. Ever since she became the editor of Lone Wolf of the Northwest, she had not had a good day. However, after raising a dog for 3 years, she still had feelings for it, not to mention that the dog sent razor blades to an author every day. This was an author she had raised step by step. How could she not be protective of him? Today, she has no choice but to meet this person. Take us to her now, the boss said seriously. Then, he moved closer to the editor and lowered his voice. This customer is very important. After it's done, I'll give you a 1,000 yuan raise and double your year-end bonus. Really? The editor's eyes lit up. Well, have I ever lied to you? Delmar patted his chest and said. After hesitating for a while, the editor finally gritted her teeth and nodded. Okay, I'll take you there. But let's make it clear first. If she doesn't want to see you, you can't force her. She's an author. If she doesn't want to update, I can't do anything about it. Not updating was the last stubbornness of an author. Hearing this, Delmar also became more cautious. Although they had signed a contract, he really couldn't go too far. At present, the publishing house depended on her. Meg boarded the carriage prepared by Delmar. The middle-aged woman sitting opposite him had been secretly looking at him. About 10 minutes later, the carriage stopped outside a small courtyard in the southwest of the city. "This is it," the female editor said, and got off the carriage first. Meg also got off the carriage. Through the hollow low wall, he could see the layout of the courtyard. In early spring, a tree in the corner of the courtyard had already sprouted small pink buds. There were flowers and plants everywhere in the courtyard, which were well taken care of. After the cold winter, facing the warm wind of early spring, they had already grown green. At the other end of the courtyard, there was an old pagoda tree tied to a swing, which was gently swaying in the wind. There was also a rocking chair in the courtyard. Although no one was sitting on it, it should be very comfortable to lie on it. It could be seen that the owner of this courtyard should be a person who loved life and enjoyed it. However, this layout seemed to be a little girlish. Was this person a pervert? Mag furrowed his brows. But to think that a man would actually imagine such a detailed story about him, even if he wasn't a pervert, he wouldn't do such a thing. "Where is she?" Meg asked. Chapter 2342. The female editor looked at the yard and looked a little worried. She hesitated and said, "Boss, should I go in and ask first? If she doesn't want to see us, then forget it." Delmar also looked at Meg and said with a smile, "Boss Padel, you often deal with authors. It's inevitable that some of them are shy and don't want to deal with people. Let's ask first. If she really doesn't want to see us, then forget it." Meg didn't insist. Anyway, he already knew the address. He wasn't afraid that he could run away. The female editor nodded slightly and knocked on the door. After a while, a lazy voice came from inside. "Who is it?" A woman. Delmar and Meg were surprised. Meg didn't expect that the guy with such a coquettish pen name was actually a girl. Of course, what surprised him even more was why Delmar was so surprised. Wasn't this the author of their company? "It's me," the female editor replied. "Didn't you just hand in the manuscript? Can't you let me have a good sleep?" The voice from inside was a little angry and dissatisfied. This voice, why does it sound a little familiar? Meg frowned. Delmar secretly glanced at Meg and then winked at the female editor. The female editor could only bite the bullet and said, My boss wants to see you and talk to you about the book cooperation. The boss of another publishing house also wants to see you." There was silence inside for a while. Then the window opened a small crack. 3 knives flew out and nailed into the tree in front of them. "No!" The window closed with a bang, and there was no sound. Looking at the 3 sabers that flew past his face, Delmar's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He swallowed and forced a smile. Well, the authors nowadays even know how to perform acrobatics. The requirements are getting higher and higher. Meg looked at the 3 knives. They didn't go deep into the tree, but the tips of the knives were firmly inserted into the tree. It meant that the girl didn't have much strength, but her accuracy was good. She should have practiced a lot. Of course, this was not important. What was important was that he had confirmed 3 things. The Northwest Lone Wolf was a woman. He should have seen this woman before. She was a young lady. Looks like this author is quite arrogant. Since that's the case, let's call off our collaboration. Meg turned around and left. Hey. Boss Padel, we can still discuss this matter." Delma was stunned. He didn't expect Meg to change his attitude so quickly. Just now, he said that he didn't want to meet him. Why did he suddenly say that they should forget about the cooperation? After chasing Meg for 3 blocks, Delmar was the last one who was out of breath. "Hi." Delmar slapped his thigh heavily. His face turned blue out of anger. The female editor also chased after Delma for 3 streets. Panting heavily, she stopped behind Delma. Boss, where is he?" "Gone." Delmar looked back at the editor with disappointment. "Your bonus and salary are gone too." "No way. Didn't we agree on this?" The female editor's expression suddenly collapsed. "You still dare to say that if you didn't spoil her too much, she wouldn't even dare to meet the boss. If you can't bring her to the office to see me tomorrow, you can forget about your job," Delma said angrily. The 20 million he was about to get flew away just like that. His heart was bleeding. However, he had already thought of another way. Since Padel was willing to offer so much money to cooperate with him, it meant that Mr. Mac's incestuous little wife was indeed very promising in the Roth Empire. As a publishing house that held the copyright, although they didn't have channels in the Roth Empire, they could totally work with a few leading publishers. Perhaps they could even make more money. As for letting the Northwest Lone Wolf come to the publishing house, one was to give her some deterrence and let her know her identity. She was just an author. What was there to be arrogant about? Secondly, he wanted to sign a new contract with her and bind her to the Delmar publishing house so that other publishing houses wouldn't have a chance to interfere. If this book became popular, it would prove that she was a capable author. She might even be able to sell well in the future. Anyway, a contract could bind her here, and she would be the cash cow of the Delmar publishing house in the future. Thinking of this, Delma, who was sitting in the carriage, couldn't help but laugh like a pig. These fellows are getting more and more overboard. As an independent author, I will never make any concessions on this kind of thing. In the room, Cynthia put the packed bag on her back and looked at the small mountain of knives in the corner of the room with a reluctant expression. If she sold them all, she could buy a lot of meat buns. It's okay. I'm just going out to relax. I'll be back after a while. Be good. Maybe I'll have to rely on you to support me when I come back without money. Cynthia went forward and pulled out the sharpest knife from the mountain of knives. She wrapped it in cowhide and hit close to her body. Then, she leaned in front of the door and looked around for a while. After making sure that there was no one outside, she slipped out quietly. I didn't expect it to be her. Meg revealed half of his face from the alley entrance with a strange expression. He knew this girl. On the day when Irina returned to the restaurant, this girl suddenly jumped out and almost nailed him to the pillar of shame. But he didn't expect that she was the Northwest Lone Wolf who wrote such a story behind his back. Thinking of her performance that day, was it because she was too immersed in writing in the middle of the night? Was that why she made such a joke? Although she was a regular customer of the restaurant, Meg didn't want to let go of this kind of customer who had ulterior motives. After all, the rumor she made had already brought him trouble, and this trouble was still fermenting. Meg followed her from a distance and finally stopped in front of a small hotel. It seems that she's going to hide here for a few days. She still knows how to save face. Meg looked at the shop sign of the small hotel and was thinking about how to negotiate with this family. In the end, Cynthia, who had just entered, came out of the hotel in high spirits. Her bag was gone. It should have been left in the room. Meg turned his head sideways and heard the girl muttering to herself as she walked past. Let's walk around first, then go to Mamie's for dinner. Today's red braised pork must be arranged. This month's royalties have to be sent to my husband. Meg, was she so self-conscious? No. Why did this sound so awkward? Did she feel that she was making money by writing pornographic novels to support him? But this dispelled Meg's thoughts of making a move on her now. Anyway, wasn't she coming to the restaurant to eat? Why not meet her at the restaurant? End of chapter. Chapter 23:43. The rumor about the owner of Mamie's keeping a mistress in his house was still spreading like wildfire. Meg couldn't even effectively refute the rumor because he didn't have a way to communicate with the majority of the people. Of course, it was very difficult to refute such rumors. After all, those who didn't believe him wouldn't believe him no matter what he said. They just liked to watch the drama unfold. However, this matter didn't cause much trouble for Meg. As long as Irina didn't believe him, he didn't care who believed him. Meg was grinding tofu pudding in the kitchen when Mia walked to the door and said with a strange expression, "Boss, Mia is arguing with the customers." Arguing? Meg put down his work and was a little surprised. It's not really an argument. It's more like Amy and Xiao Guai are lecturing the customers because of those rumors, Mia said in a low voice. She even looked like she wanted to laugh. I'm going to see what they're lecturing about. Meg also smiled when he heard that. He washed his hands and walked to the door. Amy stood on the steps at the door and glared at the customers in the line. She said loudly, "Let me tell you, our father is the best man in the world. Don't make a fuss. Otherwise, I won't go easy on you." After saying that, she snorted coldly and put her hands on her hips with a fierce but adorable expression. "We're super fierce. Ayo," Xiao Guai stood beside her on Ugly Duckling and raised a big spoon that it had stolen from the kitchen. It opened its mouth wide and let out a soft roar. The restaurant instantly fell silent. The customers looked at the pair of adorable babies and tried their best to maintain a serious expression so that they wouldn't laugh. This is too adorable. How can there be such adorable babies in this world? And there are even a couple. Could Mr. Mac's crisis management be using his precious daughter to act cute? I admit, it's effective on me. The customers' eyes lit up, and even their gazes became gentler. In this world, the people who trusted Mr. Mac the most were probably this pair of adorable babies. Up until now, they still hadn't figured out when Mr. Mac gave birth to the baby, and they weren't sure if she was Mr. Mac and the lady boss's daughter. However, after glancing at her occasionally in the restaurant for the past 2 days, she was completely captivated by his cuteness. Today, seeing her riding the big orange cat like a little bodyguard and standing guard beside Amy, the two cute little fellows were simply too adorable. What are they doing? This was only one book. Why do I have such a strong sense of immersion? Cynthia, who was standing in the middle of the group, felt even more anxious. From the moment she started queuing up, she had heard many rumors about the affair between Mr. Mac and the diner, Little Exing. With her as the main frame, the details were blurred, and various versions and scenarios were spread out. The rumors were spread in an orderly manner. At first, she was elated that she had really made it out of the entertainment circle this time. But after listening for a while, she felt that something was wrong. They weren't discussing the plot at all. Instead, they were treating the plot as reality and directly fabricating a mistress who was having an affair with Mr. Mac. Then, they discussed it with certainty and criticized Mr. Mac. This was a rumor. In Cynthia's mind, Mr. Mac had always been a perfect man with excellent character. This was also the reason why she had set him as the male lead. However, she never expected that a book that was originally only spread secretly in a small circle would actually become popular in the entertainment circle. What was even more unexpected was that there would be people who would treat a plot imagined and described in a book as something that happened in reality. Moreover, it had become a hot topic that almost everyone was talking about now. Looking at Amy and Xiao Guai, who were standing at the entrance of the restaurant with serious expressions, she didn't think that this was something interesting. Instead, she felt that she was committing a crime. That was their beloved father, who was like a mountain. Now, he was being criticized and criticized for no reason. And all of this was because of the novel she had written. Are you crazy? Cynthia clenched her fists. She wanted to rush out and explain to everyone. However, when she took a step forward, she stopped abruptly. She was a little scared. She suddenly didn't know how to handle all of this. Even if she said that she was the author, would these people believe her? She was Cynthia. A few days ago, she had asked Mr. Mac in front of the lady boss when he would marry her. If she stood out now, would they say that she was Xiao Xian? Wouldn't that prove that it was true? This is such a mess. I don't know how Mr. Mac is going to deal with it. George sighed. Romantic debts are the hardest to repay. Harrison also shook his head. What do you know? This is just a rumor. I believe in Mr. Mac's character. If he was the kind of man who would be seduced by customers, there would be a lot of women who are more outstanding than Xiao Xian who would throw themselves at him. However, Miranda was very determined at this moment. He has such a beautiful wife, so he has never cared about other women. There aren't many beauties like the lady boss in Chaos City. I'm on Big Sister's side on this. I also believe in Mr. Mac's character. Georgina nodded and said, what kind of pure person is he to be able to constantly improve himself and create one dish after another? Besides, all of the young ladies at Amy's are very beautiful. I've never heard of any rumors about them. Why would he lay his hands on a customer who came out of nowhere? This doesn't make sense. Harrison and George were stunned. They were slightly biased toward their wife. Meg stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the two little girls who were unhappy. He felt a little warm and apologetic. Yes, he didn't care, but the two little girls didn't seem to think that way. Therefore, they tried their best to protect their father's image and forbade others from bad-mouthing him. Then he saw Cynthia standing in a line. She had a conflicted expression, and cold sweat was pouring down her forehead. She bit her lip one moment and wanted to go forward the next. She also looked like she was suffering. Looks like her conscience isn't completely broken. The corners of Mag's mouth curled up slightly. This rumor that originated from a fanfiction was rather funny. Perhaps even she didn't expect that her fanfiction would become popular one day. After all, she was suddenly pulled into reality. Even if there were hundreds of millions of details in the story, it wouldn't have caused such a stir if there weren't some people behind the scenes instigating it. The ones who really had a bad conscience were the ones behind the scenes. The weather is getting warmer. Some people are going to go bankrupt, Meg thought to himself. This is the last warning. If we hear it again, don't blame us for being rude. Amy raised the folding chair in her hand and said the most vicious words in the softest and cutest tone. Super fierce. Meow. Chapter 23:44. Amy's and Little Guy's warning was not very effective, but it made the customers realize that they shouldn't talk about their father in front of their children. All the gossip stopped immediately. There's nothing to talk about. Why don't we talk about the tofu pudding instead? I think the weather is good today, and it's suitable for savory tofu pudding. What's savory tofu pudding? It's clearly sweet tofu pudding that goes better with good weather. Long live the sweet party. Sweet tofu pudding is a heresy. Soon, the traditional debate in front of Amy started again. Cynthia stood in the line with complicated thoughts. She had already made up her mind to go to the editor's office the next morning and ask them to remove that book from the shelves. Although this book had brought her a very generous remuneration, she would feel guilty if it came at the cost of Mr. Mack's reputation. She had always been proud of herself for being able to earn a living with her pen and paper. She could lose a book that made money, but she couldn't lose her dignity. The restaurant opened for business, and the customers came in one after another. Cynthia walked to Mag, nodded slightly as usual, and was about to walk past him. Lone Wolf of the Northwest, Meg suddenly said softly. Cynthia stopped in her tracks and turned to look at Meg. Her eyes widened as if she was shocked. However, Meg greeted the next customer calmly, as if the person who had just spoken wasn't him. Was it an illusion? No, it's really Mr. Mack's voice. But how did he know? Cynthia's heart pounded as if she had done something wrong and was suddenly exposed. The customer behind her looked at Cynthia, who was standing still, and coughed to remind her. Cynthia came back to her senses and looked deeply at Meg before quickly walking to an empty seat at the side. After sitting down, Cynthia still couldn't calm down. In Chaos City, apart from her editor, no one else knew what she, the Lone Wolf of the Northwest, looked like, whether she was a man or a woman. But how did Mr. Mack know her pen name? It shouldn't be, "Dear customer, what would you like to order?" Yabamiya asked Cynthia with a smile. Cynthia raised her head to look at Yabamiya and was stunned for a moment. She then lowered her head to look at the menu in front of her, feeling a little uneasy and conflicted. Mr. Mack knows that I wrote it? Will he take revenge on me? Put drugs in the food? Poison? The more Cynthia thought about it, the more she felt a chill run down her spine, and her palms started to sweat. Guess. Yabamiya saw the cold sweat on Cynthia's forehead and asked with concern, "Are you okay?" I'm fine. I want a portion of braised pork, a portion of eggplant with garlic sauce, and a bowl of rice," Cynthia quickly said. She couldn't care less. Since Boss Mag already knew about it, she didn't care whether he had poisoned or drugged the food. She was the one who caused all this trouble. Even if Mr. Mack wanted to do something to her, she deserved it. Cynthia's mind was in a mess. Meg was peeling noodles in the kitchen, but he was also secretly observing her. He wanted to know what this lass was thinking when she came to Mamie Restaurant for a meal. Was she the kind of pervert who wanted to see how he was going to keep her after she caused such a scene? Or was she feeling guilty and wanted to make up for it? So far, it seemed that she still felt guilty and uneasy about everything that had happened. At least, she didn't show any signs of gloating. Of course, this didn't mean that Meg had forgiven her. Everyone had to pay the price for what they had done. Regardless of whether it was your intention or not, this incident was ultimately caused by a book. Not long after, Cynthia's braised pork and eggplant with garlic sauce were served. Smelling the rich aroma of the meat, Cynthia swallowed her saliva. For this meal, She had purposely skipped breakfast and lunch, emptying her stomach to welcome the delicious food. But looking at the steaming hot braised pork, glowing with an enticing oil and emitting a tempting aroma, she felt a little conflicted. Eat it. This was a positive signal from her body. Don't eat it. This was her remaining rationality telling her that there was a risk. Although the braised pork emitted an enticing aroma, it also hid a dangerous aura that made people vigilant. However, this struggle only lasted less than 3 minutes. She picked up the chopsticks, picked up a piece of braised pork, and put it into her mouth. Ah, this orgasmic delicacy. Even if she died like this, it would be worth it. Cynthia was exultant, feeling that her life had reached the peak. Her hungry stomach was appeased, and her taste buds were already kneeling down to sing the song of conquest. Even though she knew that this mouthful might be poisonous, she just couldn't stop. After eating a few pieces of braised pork and half a bowl of rice, Cynthia raised her head and looked in the direction of the kitchen, her eyes full of tears. Mr. Mac, I'm sorry. Cynthia was indeed a little apologetic. Such an excellent chef, such an excellent man, had been called a jerk and criticized by others because of a degenci. Tomorrow, I must solve this problem and then officially apologize to Mr. Mac, Cynthia thought in her heart. She had already made up her mind. She didn't want anyone to be hurt because of this incident. Her original intention was only to write an interesting story and share it with other young girls who were also in love. She could also earn some living expenses at the same time. After the dinner service ended, Gina hugged little Guy, who was already asleep, and looked at Meg to comfort him. Boss, don't take this to heart. We all believe in your character. The rumors will soon be dispelled. It's just a small matter. Meg smiled and touched little Guy's face gently. As for you, are you not used to sleeping alone with little Guy at night? Does the little guy sleep well at night? Yes, she's very good. Gina nodded. Her smile was radiant with motherly love. She sleeps until dawn every day. She doesn't cry or make a fuss. I feel like I sleep better with her in my arms. That's good. She's a little guy who knows how to make adults worry. Meg smiled. He was worried that Gina wouldn't be used to being a mother for the first time. Now, it seemed that his worries were completely unnecessary. Then you all should go back and rest. Meg stood at the door and watched the girls leave. Did you find that place when you went out today? Irina stood behind Meg and asked with a smile. Meg closed the door and turned to look at her. He smiled and asked in return, Guess who I found? An acquaintance committed the crime? Irina said in surprise. Chapter 2345. You may not believe it, but it's the little girl who suddenly jumped out and asked me when I would marry her. Meg shrugged. Her. Irina was surprised, but soon her expression became a little strange. She looked at Meg carefully for a while and said, I suddenly have some doubts about whether it is really a documentary. Your doubts are groundless, Meg said seriously. Otherwise, how could the girl be so immersed in the story? That's because she was obsessed with the story and couldn't distinguish between reality and fiction. That's why the situation happened that day. After analyzing it in this way, I can understand her behavior that day. Irina sat down with her legs crossed and looked at Meg with a smile. Then what are you going to do with her? I especially observed her today. She didn't seem to expect that the book would cause such a strange reaction. So you're going to let her go? No. Since she did this, she has to bear the corresponding responsibility. Meg shook his head slightly. But I still want to find out who deliberately led this book to reality. This guy is much worse than her. You think someone wants to deal with you? Irina was a little surprised. If they know I'm Alex, they naturally wouldn't dare to have such thoughts. But if it's Meg, there are many people who are jealous of Mamie's business. Meg smiled. A restaurant owner was not a strong deterrent. Interesting. I just came back, and they're doing this. They want to make me look bad. Irina's face also turned cold. After the next morning's business hours, Meg contacted the intelligence system of the Grey Temple and used a little privilege to check if someone deliberately led the public opinion about Mamie's. It was indeed very efficient to use public resources for private purposes. A brief report was soon sent to Meg. Delmar, Cyril, these two guys, I didn't expect them to come together. Meg looked at the brief in his hand with a cold smile. In order to increase the sales of this book, Delmar Publishing deliberately changed the title of the book. When it was released, intentionally or unintentionally, it was labeled as a real-life adaptation, which successfully created a gimmick and made it popular. In the process, the name Cyril appeared. In this operation, he helped Delmar a lot and bribed Dwejob Bookstore to slander Meg. Meg could more or less understand Delmar's behavior. After all, it was related to interests, and there were many people who would do shameless things. However, Cyril had already lost the fight for the right of inheritance with Gloria and was kicked out of the competition. What the hell was he trying to do now that he was not thinking about how to counterattack and was instead trying to defame him? Although he didn't understand, it didn't affect his decision to make these two pay some price. Meg rode his bicycle to Delmar Publishing again. Before he arrived at the door, he saw Cynthia wandering in front of the publishing house. Why is she here? Meg stopped his bicycle and stood against the wall, looking at Cynthia, who was wandering in front of the publishing house. Cynthia didn't look very good today. Her eyes were dark, as if she didn't sleep well last night. After a while, she seemed to have made up her mind. She looked up at the sign on the door and walked into the publishing house. Meg was interested. He put away his bicycle and sneaked into the publishing house. He found Delmar's office and stood in the corner to listen. What? You want me to take down Mr. Mac's indecent little wife? Delmar's sharp voice sounded. There was surprise and anger in his voice. Yes, I didn't know until yesterday that this book has caused great trouble to Mr. Mac's life and even hurt his family. I never thought this would happen. I feel very guilty and apologetic toward Boss Mag, so I want to remove this book from the shelves right away. At the same time, I'm going to write a clarification letter to inform everyone that this book is just a figment of my imagination and has nothing to do with Boss Mag. Boss Mag is a good man. Cynthia's voice sounded. Her voice was firm. Meg nodded slightly. This girl really didn't know anything. She still had a conscience to stop and make up for it. Humph. Do you think you could take it down just because you want to? Delmar snorted. You took a lot of royalties and now you want to take it down. Who will bear the loss of our publishing house? Do you think our publishing house is a fool? Are you taking us for fools? Let me tell you, this book will never be taken down. Not only will it not be taken down, but I will also find someone to change it into a picture book and a play. You bastard. Meg's eyes turned cold. You are shameless. Cynthia was furious. You will ruin Mr. Mac. He didn't do anything. You wrote it. Even if I ruin him, it's you who did it. I just want to make money. Delmar grinned. Besides, you have signed a contract with me. If you continue to write well, you will get more and more royalties. If you don't know the immensity of heaven and earth and make such an unreasonable request, be careful that I take out the contract and make you bankrupt. No, I don't want to ruin him. I like him so much. I just wrote a book. Cynthia was so anxious that she was about to cry. Don't be afraid. No one knows you are the lone wolf of the Northwest. If you don't tell anyone, no one else will know. You just need to write well and submit it on time. I will take care of the rest. You can get a lot of royalties, and I can make money. It's a win-win situation. Delmar's voice became gentler. As long as I am here, I promise you will be the most famous writer on the Norland continent. Go away. Don't touch me. I won't work with a shameless person like you. Cynthia's sharp corner arrived, accompanied by a painful groan and the sound of the door slamming shut. There was no sound in the office. Interesting. Mag's lips curled up as he left the publishing house. Cynthia ran out of the publishing house. She ran for a few streets and turned into an alley. Finally, she couldn't help crying. When she turned the corner, she bumped into someone's arms. Bam! The strong and warm chest stunned Cynthia. She stumbled and almost fell. A pair of strong hands held her waist. I'm sorry, She apologized hurriedly. She looked up and saw a familiar face. Mr. Mac. Cynthia glared, and then her face turned red. I need an explanation. Meg looked at her and smiled. Chapter 2346. Cynthia didn't know who she met when she turned the corner, but she didn't expect that she would run into Mr. Mac. Boss Mag, who was wearing a suit, was still as handsome as ever. That warm smile of his often appeared in her dreams. This was a man who was easy to fall in love with. But now this man appeared in front of her alone, not in the restaurant or in the book. He wanted an explanation, but Cynthia didn't know how to explain. Well, Cynthia blushed and stared at Meg for a while. Then she lowered her head and apologized. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mack. I'm guilty." Meg looked at Cynthia, who lowered her head and seemed to have accepted her fate, and smiled. Who would have thought that this seemingly harmless girl had just refused Delmar's invitation to collude with him and gave him a critical blow to the source of his evil? This matter indeed troubled me. Meg nodded. I wanted to take this book off the shelves, but the boss of the magazine was blinded and didn't agree. Cynthia said sadly, "I don't know what to do now." Meg looked at Cynthia and said, "I want you to do me a favor, and I won't blame you for it." "What is it?" Cynthia raised her head and stared at Meg. Many thoughts flashed past her mind, and she suddenly had an embarrassing thought. However, she still blushed and said, "No matter what it is, I will do it. As long as you can forgive me, even if I have to give myself to you. I'm not that kind of person." Meg raised his hand to stop Cynthia from continuing this topic. Cynthia glanced at Meg. At the same time as she heaved a sigh of relief, she also felt a little disappointed. In the plot, this didn't seem to be the case. This kind of opportunity to be alone was usually prepared for the development of their relationship. Meg walked 2 steps closer to Cynthia and lowered his voice, saying, "Although this matter was caused by you, the more abominable guys are those who force the connection with reality and spared no effort to promote it." About 10 minutes later, Cynthia left from the other end of the alley. She went to the small hotel to get her belongings and then went home. Mag, on the other hand, went straight to Delmar magazine, but this time he changed his face and identity. "Please have a seat, Mr. Leviticus. I didn't expect you to come to Chaos City in person. I'm really flattered." Delma had a flattering smile on his face as he invited Mag to sit down on the sofa. "Mr. Delma, I'm here to talk about cooperation. Let's get straight to the point. I'm very satisfied with your book, Mr. Mac's incestuous little wife. I want to cooperate with you on this book. Our Lamp Publishing House will pay you a generous copyright fee and 40% of the profit." Meg leaned against the sofa and looked at Meg with a hint of arrogance. "You should know the power of our Lamp Publishing House." Yes. Lamp Publishing House is a very famous publishing house in the Roth Empire and even the entire Norland continent. It's our honor to cooperate with you." Delma nodded quickly and smiled even more flatteringly. However, he still asked carefully, "But Mr. Lev, may I know the detailed amount of this cooperation? Can you tell me a little? As you know, it's hard to find good books in the market now. A few publishing houses have come to me, but I haven't replied to them yet." "You're very sly." Meg gave him a deep look. Delma smiled embarrassedly. His back was drenched in cold sweat. Yesterday, he was still regretting that he had missed a big client. He didn't expect that a real big boss would come to him today. Unlike the publishing house he had never heard of yesterday, Lamp Publishing House was a very famous publishing house in Rodu. It was said that it was one of the top 5 publishing houses on the Norland continent. He had spent a lot of money on this knowledge in the past 2 days. The intelligence agency had collected the latest ranking of publishing houses in order to find reliable partners. Lamp Publishing House was on the list. "If your publishing house can guarantee the quality of the book, I'll pay you 20 million copper coins for the distribution fee across the Norland continent. Our publishing house will refine the first 5 books and the latest one into 3 medium-length books and publish them. We'll print 1 million copies first and then continue the series." Meg looked at Delma. "What do you think?" Very good. Delma grinned from ear to ear. Lamp Publishing House is indeed a big publishing house. 20 million copper coins and 1 million copies of the first edition. They only dared to print 50,000 copies of Boss Mag's incestuous little wife. This time because the big boss had promised them that the other party would buy all the copies that they couldn't sell out. That was why they had gritted their teeth and printed it. They hadn't expected it to be so popular at first. "Shall we talk about the contract?" Delma asked tentatively. The happiness came so suddenly that he was a bit dizzy. Now, all he could think of was to lock in this god of fortune and earn the 20 million copper coins first. If the first 1 million copies were sold, he could get tens of millions more. then he would reach the peak of his life. His publishing house was mediocre in the industry in Chaos City and was often made fun of by his peers. This time, he was going to make everyone look up to him. I brought the contract. It's the standard contract of our publishing house. I've asked my secretary to modify it briefly. Take a look. Meg took out a contract from his bag and handed it to Delma. That's very thoughtful of you. Delma flattered and took the contract and started to read it carefully. As Meg said, the licensing fee of 20 million copper coins would be paid to him in installments. The first payment was 5 million copper coins, and the rest would be settled within a year. And the 40% share of the publishing profit was also clearly written in the contract. Delma looked at the contract and couldn't help but be amazed by the generosity of his peer. He was as generous as a spendthrift. But when he turned to the second-last page, a clause caught Delma's attention. He frowned and thought for a while. Then he looked at Meg and asked, "Mr. Lev, I don't think it's necessary to ask for a guarantor and triple compensation for breach of contract. We're cooperating in good faith. How can we breach the contract?" Meg crossed his arms and looked at him carefully. "Since we won't breach the contract, why do you worry about this clause? According to the rules of our publishing house, if we want to pay in advance, we have to write down the breach clause and have a guarantor who can bear the risk. If you don't have enough sincerity, then our cooperation is over. We have to follow the rules." Chapter 2347. Delmar was a little confused by Meg's words. He thought of Padel, who suddenly left yesterday, and was afraid that Mr. Lev would leave too. He quickly stood up and said, "It's not like that, Mr. Leviticus. Of course, I'm very confident that our cooperation can be completed smoothly. Give me a day, and I'll go and contact the guarantor right now. I promise to meet your company's requirements, and we'll sign the contract tomorrow morning." Mag looked at Delmar and nodded with satisfaction as he said, "All right, I can see that you're a forthright person. However, you have to remember that I have connections in Chaos City as well. Don't try to play tricks on me." No, I'll take care of it. Don't worry." Delmar smiled. After seeing Meg off, he wiped the cold sweat off his brow. He really wanted to find someone to sign the contract as a guarantor. Anyway, Mr. Lev came from Rodu, so he wouldn't know much about the locals. However, Lev's warning made him give up that idea. How could the boss of one of the top 5 publishing houses on the Norland continent not have any subordinates in Chaos City? He really couldn't just brush him off. Where can I find a rich guarantor? Delmar sat on the chair and scratched his head hard. He felt a headache coming on. "Boss, Mr. Cyril is looking for you." The secretary's voice sounded from outside the door. "Cyril." Delmar's eyes lit up. How could he forget about him? He quickly said, "Let him in." Delmar stood up to open the door, and Cyril walked in with a smile. "Mr. Delmar, long time no see. I heard you've made a fortune recently. Thanks to you, I made some money." Delmar invited Cyril to take a seat with a smile and closed the door behind him. Cyril lay on the sofa and crossed his legs. He smiled and said, "That's right. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't have been able to publish such a popular book. Tell me, how are you going to thank me?" Delmar's smile stiffened. He was just being polite. He didn't expect Cyril to take it seriously. Although Cyril had indeed put in a lot of effort to make the company explode this time, they had never talked about sharing the profits before. Naturally, there was no reason for him to give up the fat meat that was already in his mouth. However, Delmar now needed his help. After thinking for a while, he gritted his teeth and said, "Not only do I want to thank you, but I also want to do a good business with you." "Oh, what's the good news?" Cyril was really interested as he asked Delmar. Ever since he had returned to Chaos City from Rodu, he had completely fallen out of favor. He had been stripped of his status as the heir to the throne and was now nothing more than an idler at home. If it weren't for the old madam secretly helping him, he wouldn't even be able to take a carriage when he went out. He couldn't take it lying down, so he swindled a sum of money from his mother and borrowed some from a few bad friends to promote his book, Mr. Mac's Indecent Little Wife. He also spread rumors in all the major newspapers and libraries and successfully smeared Meg's name. He came to see Delmar today to ask him to write a follow-up The unspeakable secret of Mr. Mac and the Suede boss's wife. He wanted to destroy Gloria. He wanted this adulterous couple to be despised completely. In this way, the family Moreton's right of inheritance would return to him again. However, not having enough money to spend was still a sore point for him. He came to the publishing house today not only to ask Delmar to write a new book for him, but also to get some money from him. Delmar had made a lot of money, so there was no reason for him to lose money. Boss Mag's incestuous little wife has become very popular. A major magazine publisher in Rodu came to me and asked me to license this book to them, and they're offering me a sum of money. Delma told Cyril about Mag's visit to him, and also made an offer to Cyril. How much did you say? Cyril stared at Delmar with his eyes wide open. 20 million, Delmar said. Fuck, you made a fortune. Cyril almost jumped out of his chair. He had never thought that a book could make so much money. The deal is almost done, but according to the procedure of the big publishing house, I still need a guarantor. Of course, I thought of you, so I want you to be the guarantor. After the deal is done, I'll give you 5 million copper coins as a reward, Delmar said with a smile. 5 million copper coins. Cyril muttered. It seemed that the money was not enough, but he was actually very happy. It was enough for him to spend a lot of money. Don't you want that Boss Mag's reputation to spread far and wide? The boss of the Lamp Publishing House said that he would print 1 million copies for the first time. If he sold 1 million copies, his reputation would be completely ruined, and he would never be able to make a comeback, Delmar added. Really 1 million copies? Cyril's eyes lit up. He moved closer to Delmar and asked, Can I add a character? This book is not finished yet. Just tell me what character you want. I'm sure you'll be satisfied. Delmar nodded with a smile. I want to add the lady boss of suede clothing, Gloria. Cyril grinned. Delmar's expression changed slightly. He swallowed and said, Isn't that your niece? Yes, that's her. I want her to be notorious, Cyril said with a smile. Well, Delmar was a bit embarrassed. He was not stupid. He knew who Gloria was. She was the current head of Family Moreton, a rising star in the business world of Chaos City, and a business magnate in the future. He dared to encourage Cynthia to write about Mag in such a way because he was sure that as a restaurant owner, Mag was only good at cooking and had no power or influence. Even if he was angry, he couldn't do anything to him. However, the Moreton family was different. They could easily crush him to death with a single finger. Don't worry. As long as you make her infamous, she'll have no choice but to resign from her position as the family leader. From now on, I'll be the family leader of the Moreton family, and I'll protect you. Cyril patted his chest as he promised. You're right. You're right. Delmar agreed with a smile, but he didn't take it seriously. Others can't do it. Only the lone wolf in the Northwest can do it, Cyril said. Okay. Delmar quickly said, about the guarantee, you see, when will you sign the contract? I have an appointment with her tomorrow morning. Then I'll come tomorrow morning. Okay. Take care. Delmar walked Cyril out with a smile. He said to his secretary, Prepare the carriage. I'm going out. Soon, Delmar took the female editor to the carriage and went straight to the lone wolf in the Northwest. In the carriage, Delmar said seriously to the female editor, You have to let me see her today. As long as she agrees to my conditions, you'll be promoted to the editor-in-chief. If it doesn't work out, you can go home. You don't have to come. Okay. The female editor got out of the carriage with an aggrieved face. She stood in front of the door and adjusted her mood. When she raised her hand to knock, the door opened from the inside. Come in. A voice sounded from inside. Daddy's restaurant in the alternate world will be updated continuously. There are no advertisements on the website. Please bookmark and recommend Daddy's restaurant. If you like Daddy's restaurant in the alternate world, please bookmark it. Daddy's restaurant in the alternate world, please bookmark it. Chapter 2348. This was the second time that Delmar had met Cynthia. Just this morning, this crazy woman had given his big baby a big blow. However, the negotiation process was much easier than he had imagined. With just a simple negotiation, Cynthia agreed to most of his requests, including re-signing the contract, extending the authorization period, and submitting the manuscript again in 10 days. Isn't it too easy? Delmar returned to the carriage and asked the editor sitting opposite him with a bit of disbelief. She has always been like this. She doesn't care much about anything. The female editor said carefully. Great. Delmar clapped his hands and hugged the female editor with a laugh. He said generously, from today on, you are the chief editor. I will arrange the personnel transfer for you when we go back. Your salary will be doubled starting from next month. Thank you, boss. The female editor was so excited that her face turned red. She didn't expect that the edge of dismissal would be a promotion and a raise. Delmar closed his eyes and began to think about the details of the contract tomorrow. Although he had just reached a verbal agreement with Cynthia, her book was still in his hands. If she wanted to make money, she had to be obedient. Cyril had promised to be the guarantor, and the follow-up of the work was guaranteed. The deal was done. Meg met Cynthia in the small hotel. She packed her things and went to live in that small hotel again. I have done as you said. Cynthia looked at Meg and said. Her eyes were a bit evasive and her face was a bit red. It was the first time that she had been alone with Mr. Mac in a small room. It really made her heart beat faster. Mag nodded slightly and said, Very good. I will look for you when I need you. You better disguise yourself before you go out these 2 days. Don't let anyone recognize you. And don't let anyone find you. Okay. Cynthia agreed softly. Looking at Meg, who was about to leave, she hesitated for a while and couldn't help but gnash her teeth and say, Mr. Mac, after this is over, can I still go to Mamie's for dinner? It won't be over so soon. Meg looked at her and smiled. He turned around and left without looking back. Cynthia stood there in a daze. After thinking for a long time, she still couldn't understand what Meg meant. Could it be? Mr. Mac wants to use this as a threat to make me his little excion? A small hotel, no one knows about it. No one is allowed to go out. Isn't this imprisoning Polly? Meg didn't know that the girl's little brain could fill in so many things. He only thought that at this time tomorrow, some people would have a headache about going bankrupt. He wasn't very good at business wars, but he still had his family's bloodline. He could easily use some of the tricks that he heard the old men bragging after meals to toy with these guys. Boss, how is it? The rumors outside are getting worse and worse. Should we give an explanation? Yabamiya and the others had arrived at the restaurant early in the morning. When they saw Meg returning from outside, they all gathered around him and asked with concern. Don't worry, it's a piece of cake. I've already contacted the author of this book. She has also agreed to write an apology letter to clarify everything. Meg said with a relaxed smile. You met the author, Northwest Lone Wolf? Is she a girl or a guy? Is she a regular of the restaurant? She must be a girl, right? Little Excion? Is she pretty? Or is she handsome? The girls were all interested, but their focus made Meg a little speechless. I say, why are you all so interested in an author? Meg rolled his eyes. He's a guy, a 40-something-year-old guy. Wow, how can this be? It's over, it's over. I can't believe that the person who wrote such a detailed article is a big guy, not a pretty girl. The ladies were greatly disappointed and immediately lost their interest. However, boss, I'm even more impressed by your charm now. What kind of charm do you have to make a burly man in his 40s write something so detailed? It's really jaw-dropping, Angela said to Mag with a weird expression. Meg squinted at her and didn't want to answer her stupid question. Now that the author has made a statement, this matter should be solved. Those who spread the rumor are really too much. They want our restaurant to be involved in a scandal and then fail. Yabamiya said angrily. Even if there is a scandal, the customers who leave can't go to them. Meg shook his head with a smile and turned to the kitchen to prepare for the evening business. Phyllis, come here. I'll teach you how to knead dough. Meg shouted in the kitchen. Coming. Phyllis rushed into the kitchen like a gust of wind. Her face was full of excitement. She was finally qualified to unlock new skills. At 10 o'clock the next morning, Meg and Irina, who was disguised as a secretary, met Cyril at Delmar Publishing as expected. Irina took out the contract and asked Delmar and Cyril to confirm it again. Delmar skimmed through the contract and checked the amount. Then he confirmed that the contract was correct. Cyril didn't even bother to read it. He looked at Meg and asked, Are you going to print 1 million copies? Mag glanced at him and curled his lips into a smile. He nodded and said, "Yes." "Good. Then you have to sell them all. Let the story of this scumbag and bitch spread across the Norland continent." Cyril's smile became more and more smug. "This is a literary work," Meg said calmly. Delmar was afraid that Cyril would irritate Meg, so he hurriedly said, "Yes, yes, yes. This is an excellent literary work. Mr. Lev, we've checked the contract. There's no problem. Let's sign it." "Okay." Meg nodded. Irina handed him a pen. He signed his name and pressed his thumbprint on the contract. Delmar and Cyril, the guarantor, also learned the 1,000-character fingerprint. "There are 3 copies of the contract. We each keep 1 copy." Meg put away a copy and snapped his fingers. Irina took out a silver note and gave it to him. "This is 5 million copper coins. It's the first royalty." Meg pushed the silver note to Delmar. He stood up and reached out his right hand. "Nice working with you, Mr. Delmar." "Nice working with you, Mr. Leviticus." Delmar shook hands with Meg with a big smile. Then he took the silver note and checked it carefully. Then he filled out a receipt and handed it to Meg. Cyril was a little envious as he looked on from the side. Earning 5 million copper coins so easily was truly a good business opportunity. Meg left with Irina. When they went out, the wind happened to rise. The willow branches were swaying, and the catkins were flying. "That's a pretty good funeral scene." Mag grinned coldly. End of chapter. Chapter 2349. On the same day, on the front page of 5 influential local newspapers in Chaos City, the author named Lone Wolf of the Northwest published an apology letter and clarified the rumors that had been spreading recently. In this apology letter, he also criticized Delmar Publishing for their malicious marketing and refusal to take down the book, which had a negative impact on the author's life. In the end, the Lone Wolf of the Northwest also promised to stop updating Mr. Mac's indecent little wife forever. This apology letter was also a notice to stop updating and advised Delmar to take care of himself. The popularity of Mr. Mac's indecent little wife made the name Lone Wolf of the Northwest quite influential. Therefore, when people saw this apology letter, it quickly set off a heated discussion. The author refutes the rumors online. "She made it up. We were careless. I knew it. Mr. Mac is such an excellent person. How could he do such a thing? It's ridiculous. If Mr. Mac isn't that kind of person, then I don't have a chance." The author refuted the rumors in person, which was very credible. And it was funny to wake everyone up with one sentence and take it as reality. The news had legs. Soon, it reached Delmar, who was drinking with Cyril in the restaurant. "What?" Delmar dropped the wine glass in his hand. He grabbed the newspaper from his secretary's hand and looked at the apology letter on the front page. His face turned pale instantly. "What's wrong?" Cyril raised his head from the abyss and looked at Delmar confusedly. "It's over. It's over." Delmar sat down on the chair and said in a trembling voice, "The Lone Wolf of the Northwest said she's not writing anymore." "What do you mean she's not writing anymore? What's wrong?" Cyril asked in a louder voice when he saw Delmar's expression. He asked the woman on top of him to go away. "See for yourself. This is the author who wrote that book. She said she's not writing this book anymore." Delmar handed over the newspaper in his hand to him absent-mindedly. Cyril took it and read for a while and smiled. "It's just an author. If she's not writing, we can find another one. Can't we do it without her?" "We can't do it without her." Delmar looked at Cyril gloomily. "Without her, we'll break the contract." "Break the contract?" Cyril's voice immediately became shrill, and he suddenly realized the severity of the situation. He hurriedly snatched the contract from the supervisor's hands and flipped to the breach clause. His face immediately paled as he read through it. "Delmar, you motherfucker." Cyril grabbed the glass and threw it at Delmar's face. "I'm a victim. You asked me to be your guarantor. You wanted to pay you 30 million. You old bastard. How black-hearted." Cyril flew into a rage. His face turned blue and red. He knew the terms were written in black and white. Since he signed it, he couldn't escape. "I didn't know that bitch lied to me. She told me yesterday that she would continue to write. Who knew she would stab me in the back?" Delmar was shaking with anger. I'm going to find her right now. I'll ask her to write a new clarification report. She'll say that the previous one is fake. I'll explain it to Mr. Leviticus. I think we can salvage the situation. You'd better salvage the situation. Otherwise, I'll make sure you can't stay in Chaos City anymore. Cyril flipped the table and left angrily. Delmar hurried downstairs. He took a horse-drawn carriage to Cynthia's residence. There was a big lock on the door. It was quiet in the yard. Delmar kicked the door for a while, but there was no response. He leaned against the door and slid down. His face was pale. He knew he was screwed. 30 million copper coins. He couldn't afford it even if he sold the company. Boss. The secretary came up nervously. Delmar looked at him. His eyes lit up. He said in a low voice, "Help me up. Let's go back to the company." Yesterday, the company had received a sum of money. Including the deposit, it was about 5 million. Plus the 5 million banknotes he received in the morning, it was enough for his family for the rest of their lives. It was a pity that the company he had built for half of his life would be ruined. He had thought that this popular book could be his money tree, but he didn't expect that the tree would break after 2 days. But it didn't matter. He would go to the company to get the money and run away with his wife and children. He would let Cyril take care of it. Anyway, he was the guarantor. Delmar's horse-drawn carriage stopped at the gate of the publishing house. Delmar jumped off the carriage and rushed into the office. Soon, he came out with a briefcase and went straight to the horse-drawn carriage. But as soon as he came to the carriage, 2 hands had been put on his shoulders. Delmar was shocked. He turned around and saw the 2 officers' uniforms. His face turned pale. "Mr. Delmar, right? We have received a report that you are suspected of contract fraud and may escape. In order to protect the property of the owner, we will take you back to the mayor's mansion for further investigation. Please cooperate." One officer said in a low voice, "I'm innocent. I'm innocent," Delmar shouted. The noise outside attracted the attention of the staff of the publishing house. They all rushed to the door to see what was going on. Seeing their boss being detained by the officers of the mayor's mansion, they were all shocked. With the publishing of small H novels so strict now, take him away. The 2 officers didn't talk nonsense with Delmar. They directly detained him in the prison carriage and took him away. On the other side, Cyril returned to the Moreton Manor. The more he thought about it, the more flustered he became. He hid in the room and asked the servants to guard the door. He said that he was sick and didn't want to see anyone. However, this was not enough to stop the officers from arresting them with a detention order. "What did I do? You want to arrest me? This is the Moreton Manor. You can't mess around," Cyril yelled. He was trying to put on a strong front, but he was actually a coward. "Cyril, you are suspected of contract fraud. The amount involved is huge. Now we are taking you back to the mayor's mansion for investigation. Please cooperate." The leading officer took out the detention order and said in a low voice. All of the members of the Moreton family had already gathered in this courtyard and were discussing spiritedly among themselves. However, no one dared to approach Cyril at the sight of the officers holding the arrest warrant. They were all wondering what kind of trouble Cyril had gotten himself into to warrant the arrest of the city lord. "Who dares to touch my son?" A sharp voice sounded, and old Madame Denise strode over with her walking stick, blocking Cyril's path. "Mr. Denise, please cooperate with us. Otherwise, you will be arrested for interfering with the investigation," the staff said calmly. He didn't retreat because of Denise's appearance. "How dare you?" Denise frowned. "Take him away." The officer waved his hand, and 4 officers came forward. Denise grabbed the officer's hand and scratched his face. She shouted at the servants beside her, "Someone is beating me up. The officers are beating me up. What are you waiting for? Come and protect me and the young master." The servants looked at each other. They didn't know if they should intervene. These were the officers of the mayor's mansion. "If you don't back down, chase them all out of family Moreton," Denise said viciously. The servants had no choice but to surround her. "Who dares?" An angry shout sounded like thunder at the entrance of the yard. The yard suddenly became quiet. Everyone opened up a path. Jeffrey strode in and looked coldly at Cyril and Denise. "Father, save me!" Cyril shouted in panic. "They want to arrest me for no reason. I am innocent, slap." A loud slap sounded. Cyril's face instantly swelled. Chapter 2350. The yard fell into silence. Everyone looked at Jeffrey in surprise. Cyril was also completely rooted to the spot. His face was stinging with pain, and he didn't think that his father would slap him in front of so many people. "Bastard! How dare you disobey the mayor's order?" Jeffrey snapped. Cyril was so scared that he didn't know what to say. He turned to Denise for help. "Master, you have to help our son. He was wronged. He wouldn't dare to do anything illegal." Denise stepped forward, and while wiping her tears, she begged, "Please tell the city lord not to capture Cyril." Slap! Jeffrey raised his hand and gave Denise another loud slap. This time, it landed on her face. When the servants in the courtyard saw this, their eyes widened a little. They all looked away, not daring to look at it. Cyril was also rooted to the spot. His mouth gaped open as he stared at Denise and Jeffrey, and his heart had already plunged into complete despair. Old Madame Denise was stunned for quite a while before she pulled herself together. She covered her face and looked at Jeffrey in disbelief. Her voice suddenly became shrill as she screamed, "You hit me. A loving mother leads to a useless son. If you hadn't spoiled him so much, he wouldn't be in this state today. Even now, you still don't repent and want to go down the wrong path. If I don't hit you, how can I uphold the family rules?" Jeffrey looked at her coldly. "You are such a heartless man. You hit your wife at your age. If it weren't for my family, you wouldn't be as powerful as you are now. Now you think I'm old and weak, so you want to beat me to death to get remarried, don't you? Let me tell you, it won't be that easy. Today Denise sat on the ground and started to make a scene. "Take her away." Jeffrey didn't even look at her. He ordered coldly. The old maids were reluctant, but they didn't dare to disobey their grandpa's order. After all, slaps didn't taste good. They dragged Denise away. "You caused this, so you have to take responsibility. This time, no one will clean up your mess." Jeffrey glanced at Cyril and nodded at the mayor's officers. Then he turned and left. "Father." Cyril chased after him in a panicked manner, only to have two officers clamp down on his shoulders, one on his left and one on his right. "Young Master Cyril, please come with us." The leading officer smiled and waved his hand. He dragged Cyril away. The servants made way for them. No matter how loud Cyril screamed, no one dared to stop them. Although they didn't know what Cyril had done, they all had a consensus. Young Master Cyril was finished, and Miss Gloria would be in charge of this family in the future. The two criminals were taken to the mayor's office, together with Meg, who had changed his appearance, and Cynthia, who was present as a witness, also appeared in the mayor's office. The presiding officer of the case was Dicus, an old friend of Meg's. The mayor's office was so efficient because he had talked to Dicus, who must have reported to Michael. Therefore, as soon as the papers were handed in, the criminals were taken back. Cyril and Delmar were taken to record their statements. Under the supervision of mental sorcerers, as ordinary people, they couldn't lie. They could only tell the whole story. The case was actually very simple. It was a case of breach of contract. As long as the money could be paid, the crime would not be serious. However, the amount was huge, so the two criminals were arrested first. Dicus read their statements and the contract provided by Meg. He nodded and said, "So, the case is very clear. You two signed this contract with Lev, promising to be responsible for the breach of contract, and someone will be responsible for it as a guarantor. Now, Mr. Lev has provided a certificate that the original author has given up the continuation of the book and asked to remove it from the bookstore. This is a total violation of the terms of the contract. You two have committed fraud. Now, Mr. Lev wants to terminate the contract and ask you to pay the corresponding amount of 60 million copper coins." "Bitch, you tricked me. You said you would continue to write the book." Delmar pointed at Cynthia, who was standing on the witness stand, and roared. "I went to your publishing house this morning and told you my attitude. Many people in your company heard our conversation and argument. As for the agreement you mentioned, I don't know anything about it. You can provide evidence." Cynthia said calmly, "You're lying. You said it." Delmar grabbed the railing. His knuckles were white, and the veins on his forehead were bulging. 60 million copper coins. Even if he and Cyril each took half of the money, it would still be 30 million copper coins. Even if he sold the publishing house, he could not afford it. Silence in the court. Dicus shouted coldly. Cyril looked at Delmar, and his heart sank. 30 million copper coins was not a small sum of money, even for the Moreton family. To him, it was money that he could not afford, even if he emptied his underwear. If it were before, he might have thought that his father would help him. But today, Jeffrey had told him clearly that he would not help him at all. Where'd he find the 30 million copper coins? Sir, Cyril looked at Dicus and said, "This has nothing to do with me, Master Dicus. I was tricked into signing the agreement, and I didn't get anything out of it. This has nothing to do with me, so I don't have to take any responsibility, right? Isn't it written in black and white? You're the guarantor, so you have to take half of the responsibility. So, you have to pay half of the compensation." Dicus looked at him and smiled. "Besides, it's not like you didn't get anything. According to your testimony, Delmar promised you 5 million copper coins. You took his money and worked for him. How can there be no risk?" Cyril's face turned deathly pale as he pointed at Delmar and Mag, and said that they conspired to deceive me. How can there be such a coincidence? I just signed a contract this morning, and I haven't received the money yet. How can I break the contract? Sir, I was wronged. I'm the one who was tricked. Dicus ignored him and directly announced, "The case is simple. The evidence is clear. Delmar and Cyril broke the contract and cheated Leviticus. According to the contract, they will pay Lev 60 million copper coins. Each of them will pay 30 million copper coins. Because of the large amount, you two will be detained for the time being. Ask your family to collect the money and send it to the mayor's office. After you pay the full amount, you can be released as soon as possible. If you can't pay the full amount, you will be convicted according to the difference." "You are wise, sir." Meg smiled and cupped his hands. Chapter 23:51. Everything was within Meg's expectation, including the fact that no one from Family Moreton came out to mess things up. Meg could understand Jeffrey's feelings. Such a disappointing son had to suffer some hardships, otherwise he would only become a bigger prodigal son. Ignoring the cursing words of Delmar and Cyril, Meg left the Castellans' mansion. Next, it was the Castellans' mansion's job to lock up the property of these two people. If they couldn't pay it back, they would seal it and auction it directly. This trick easily earned 60 million and also solved the misunderstanding. It was killing two birds with one stone. Meg and Cynthia met in a small hotel room. Did you arrange all this?" Cynthia looked at Meg with admiration. If what she liked about Mag in the past was his cooking and his gentle personality, then what she had seen in the past 2 days was that he was a wise and resourceful businessman. Delmar, a wily old fox, and Cyril, a rascal, were actually tricked by him. 30 million copper coins, that was a huge sum of money. Delmar must have gone bankrupt. As for Cyril, she had probably heard that Family Moreton was rich and imposing. It depended on whether they were willing to pay the ransom. "You cooperated well." Meg nodded with a smile. Cynthia blushed, looked at Meg, and whispered, Then what I wrote about you, is it over?" "I'm afraid it's not that easy." Meg shook his head, looked at Cynthia, and said, "If you do something wrong, you have to pay for it. Don't you think so?" Cynthia bit her lower lip. She was just an innocent little writer. What could she pay for it? The tens of thousands of copper coins she had were probably nothing in his eyes. She had sent an apology letter, and she had been a witness, but he still didn't want to let her go. Looking at Meg, who got up and closed the window, her heart thumped nervously. Why did he close the window? Were they afraid that some strange sounds would be heard? What did he want to do? But it was daytime now. "Come on." Cynthia lay down on the bed and opened her hands, tears of resignation rolling down her cheeks. Her movements were so skillful that it surprised even herself. Furthermore, why didn't he feel aggrieved or sad? Instead, he felt a little expectant. She recalled that in her dainty wife's book, the first time XIN had an affair with Mr. Mack was also in a small hotel. Cynthia's face flushed red, and her breathing quickened as she thought about how the scenario that she had rehearsed countless times in her mind was about to happen to her. "This is my first time. Be gentler," she whispered. "What are you doing?" Meg stood beside the bed with a contract in his hand. He looked at Cynthia, who was lying on the bed with her legs spread out. Her face was inexplicably red, and the corners of her eyes were brimming with tears. He asked curiously, "What first time?" Cynthia suddenly raised her head and looked at Meg, who was standing beside the bed with a document in his hand instead of a whip. Judging from his serious look, he didn't press down on her like in the book. She was stunned for a moment and suddenly realized that she might have misunderstood. She quickly clamped her legs together and sat up on the bed. "Well, I Cynthia blushed and her eyes wandered. Suddenly, she stared at the document in Meg's hand and asked, "What's this?" "Oh, this is a contract. Take a look. If there's no problem, sign it." Meg handed over the document in his hand. "Sign it, and our previous grudge will be written off." Cynthia's heart skipped a beat. A contract? Why did she have to sign a contract? Thinking of Delmar and Cyril, who had just been put in jail by Meg with a contract, Cynthia panicked even more. She took a closer look and was a little surprised. This was a commission creation contract, which was somewhat similar to the one she had signed with Delmar Publishing. According to the contract, Meg would commission her to create 5 works, and each work would be bought out at the price of 200,000 copper coins. After the 5 works were finished, she could terminate the contract at any time without any restrictions. However, there were requirements for the 5 works. Meg would provide the outlines, and Cynthia would create them. To Cynthia, the price of 200,000 copper coins per book was undoubtedly a very generous remuneration. Normally, it would only take her 2 months to complete a work. This was a good project that could earn her millions annually. However, learning from Delmar's mistake, Cynthia read the contract very carefully and made sure that there was no clause that would make her bankrupt or even lose her own life. She still didn't trust it and asked, "There are no hidden clauses, right?" "Don't worry. I really want to find a partner. I won't do such a thing." Meg nodded with a smile. "Why me?" Cynthia was still puzzled. Meg shouldn't like her. Why would he give her such a money-making opportunity? "I'm interested in your talent. Don't think too much." Meg comforted her, fearing that the girl would misunderstand. "Just my talent? Then what about my beautiful young body?" Cynthia almost blurted out what was in her heart. She held it back and nodded. "You have a good eye." Cynthia had no choice but to choose to become rich and sign the contract. "This is the advance payment. You can go home now. Don't move. I'll come to you when I've thought of the outline." Meg handed her a banknote of 100,000 copper coins. "Thank you, boss." Cynthia accepted the banknote happily. She actually felt that she was being supported. She said casually, "Then come often." Meg, who had just walked to the door, almost fell out. Why was this line so familiar? On the way back to the restaurant, Meg felt relaxed. The rumors had come to an end for the time being. The chaos in the market should also stop for a while. He had also gotten Cyril into jail. This was killing many birds with one stone. Even if he couldn't get back all the 60 million copper coins, it was more than enough to build a few school buildings for Hope School. This plot isn't a little too fast? He just called Mr. Mack a scumbag yesterday, and now he's refuting the rumors? And the boss of the publishing house has been arrested. Vivian held the newspaper with a conflicted expression. How should I explain this to Luna? I just told her yesterday that Mr. Mack was a scumbag. Bye. The next one will be even better. In order to take care of Luna's feelings, she had tried her best. However, this world didn't care about her feelings at all. But Mr. Mack's method is pretty good. He sent the boss of the publishing house to jail. Now, no one will dare to spread rumors. Vivian thought that other than Mr. Mack, there shouldn't be anyone else who would be so coincidental as to mess with the boss of the publishing house. Chapter 2352. The news that Delmar and Cyril were arrested soon spread in the publishing circle. The details were not clear yet, but it was related to Mr. Mack's indecent little wife, and Delmar Publishing House had been shut down. The bookstores reacted the fastest. The books that were selling well in the morning disappeared in the afternoon. When readers asked, They all said that they had never sold the books. More and more rumors about this matter were spreading. Some said that it was Mr. Mack of Mamie's who took action. He sued Delmar for slander and put Delmar in jail. As for Cyril, people in the publishing circle had heard about what he had done with the book recently, so it was not surprising that he was arrested together with Mr. Mack. There were also some who said that this matter had nothing to do with Boss Mag, and that it was an expert from Rodu who had sent the two of them to prison without risking anything. Not only did he send the two of them to prison, he even had to compensate them until they went bankrupt, and their lives were probably ruined. Anyway, Mr. Mack's indecent little wife was the main topic, which made people in the publishing circle sigh. It was rare for a publishing house to publish a popular book. For a small publishing house like Delmar, one popular book was enough to make a living for several years. They didn't expect that they would be involved in such an unexpected disaster. However, there were different opinions about this matter in the publishing circle. Delmar and Mr. Mack had used Mr. Mack's reputation as a gimmick and put a book on Mr. Mack's head to ruin his reputation. Many people despised Mr. Mack. It was karma for Delmar to end up like this. Some publishing houses that planned to follow Mr. Mack's lead hurriedly stopped their projects after hearing the news. Some books related to Mr. Mack were even taken off the shelves in a hurry, for fear that they would also be sent to jail. This time, people in the publishing circle saw the power of Mamie's Mr. Mack. The author made a statement in person to clarify. The book was taken off the shelves, and the publishing house closed down. This also successfully cleared Meg's reputation as a scumbag. When Meg returned to the restaurant, it was almost evening. The customers lining up at the door of the restaurant greeted him warmly, and some of them apologized shyly. Meg smiled indifferently. He didn't take the guest discussions to heart. "Giddy up. Hiya. Giddy up." Meg opened the door and entered the restaurant, upon which he was greeted by the sight of little Gwai riding on Ugly Duckling and jumping all over the restaurant. Ugly Duckling had grown quite a bit during this period of time. It was about 20 kilograms now, and it was furry like a big fat ball. Furthermore, little Gwai was simply too small, and it was straddling Ugly Duckling's body with its two little legs dangling in the air. It was holding a shiny little golden trident in its hand, and had a red cloak that it had found somewhere around its body, making it look like a little general. Meg pushed open the door, and Ugly Duckling happened to be running toward him. It didn't pay attention and crashed into the door, causing its round body to roll forward. Meanwhile, little Gwai, who was on Ugly Duckling's back, was also thrown out and flew toward Meg. Meg hurriedly reached out to catch little Gwai. The little fellow was so soft that she was stunned for a moment when he caught her. Then she giggled, clapped her little hands, and happily said, "Fun, fun. Father, raise me up high. Raise me up high." Meg initially wanted to teach the little fellow to be careful with a stern face. However, when he saw that adorable little face and heard her soft and adorable words, he couldn't hide the smile on his face anymore. He raised the little fellow up high and gently tossed her up before catching her again. Little Gwai's laughter reverberated in the restaurant, and Gina, who was sitting at the side, also smiled. "All right, little Gwai can play with Ugly Duckling by herself, but be careful." Meg played with little Gwai for a while before putting her down on the ground. Little Gwai looked up and expectantly asked, "Father, when will big sister Amy finish school?" "Soon. She should be back in a while." Meg looked at the clock on the wall. Little Gwai's eyes lit up, and she ran toward the door. She even shouted, "Then I'll wait for her at the door." Meow. Ugly Duckling, who was stunned for a while, also ran toward the door. It sat down beside little Gwai, who was sitting on the steps at the door. It tilted its head and looked at her for a while before resting its head gently on her body. "You're so heavy, Ugly Duckling." Little Gwai pushed its furry head away in disdain, and then leaned on its soft belly with a comfortable smile on her face. "So cute. Little Boss didn't dare to steal in the past. Does Little Boss have anyone to team up with now? She's so cute. I also want to have a cute little baby with Mr. Mack." "Bro, you're making things difficult for Mr. Mack, aren't you?" The faces of the customers lining up at the restaurant's entrance all lit up. They couldn't resist little Gwai's cuteness at all. Meg took a look at the little fellow and then withdrew his gaze with a smile. Little Gwai said she wanted to play with Ugly Duckling, so I brought her here earlier, Gina explained to Meg as she stood up. It must be tough for you to take care of a child alone. Meg looked at Gina. He had picked up a child for free and almost didn't take care of her. Gina had been taking care of her all this time. Little Guai is very obedient. It's not tough at all. Gina shook her head with a smile. Her gaze toward the door was full of gentleness. Meg chatted with Gina for a while. He glanced at Phyllis and Camilla, who were busy in the kitchen, and quickly went upstairs to change into a chef's suit. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Meg felt a strong, murderous aura as soon as he entered the kitchen. He saw Camilla wearing 10 sharp nail clippers in her hands. As she waved her hands, the knives flashed, and all kinds of ingredients were cut into strips and chunks. Camilla usually worked like this, but Meg felt a murderous aura in the kitchen today. Dumped by a man? Meg looked at Camilla, who had a cold expression, and asked casually. Ding! The fingertips and knives collided, and there was a crisp sound. Metal and stone collided, and sparks flew everywhere. There is no such man in this world, and there won't be in the future, Camilla said coldly. Meg was speechless. This woman has quite a temper. However, seeing that she was angry, he couldn't be bothered to provoke her. He minded his own business and went to grind beans. Camilla looked at Meg, who ignored her and gritted her teeth in anger. This fellow actually didn't even ask her what happened? Then how was she going to say the words that she had prepared for so long? Oh, right. Meg turned his head. Camilla reorganized her emotions and was ready to continue the conversation. Phyllis, come here. I'll teach you how to grind tofu again, Meg said to Phyllis, who was beside him. Okay. Phyllis walked over happily and watched Meg make the tofu pudding seriously. Camilla wanted to clench her fists, but her fingertips were blocked. She could only stomp her feet angrily. She thought that this incident could make Meg suffer a little and distract him, so that she could get the photo stone back or take some videos of Meg in exchange. She didn't expect this incident to end in just 2 days. Chapter 2353. Everyone in the restaurant also knew about the author's clarification and the arrest of the publisher's boss. Everyone was naturally happy. After all, they had been in a bad mood when they heard the whispers of the customers these past 2 days. Now that the rumor was dispelled and the bad guy was arrested, this matter could be considered to have come to an end. As for who did this, Meg didn't admit or deny it. He only said that a friend helped him a little. As for who the author was, Meg kept it a secret for the shameless Miss Cynthia. He only said that the author was a wretched uncle about 40 years old. Young mistress, Cyril has been arrested, a female secretary said as she walked quickly into Gloria's office. Gloria was stunned when she heard that. She put down the book in her hand and asked the secretary what happened. I just heard from your family that he was involved in a contract fraud and breach of contract. He has to pay 30 million copper coins as a penalty. Because of the huge amount, he was detained by the city lord's castle, the secretary said quickly. And I asked around. This matter seems to have something to do with Mr. Mac from Mamie's. Mr. Meg? Gloria was puzzled. What does this have to do with him? Well, the secretary blushed, but didn't dare to hide anything. She could only tell her in detail how the book, Mr. Mac's Indecent Little Wife, had been circulating in Chaos City these past 2 days, and how Mr. Mac had become a scumbag in everyone's mouth. Why didn't I know about this? Gloria frowned. She had been busy with the spring dress for the past 2 days. She didn't expect this to happen. Today, the author came out personally to refute the rumor and cleared Mr. Mac's name. Also, the book in the bookstore has been removed from the shelves, the secretary said hurriedly. But I didn't expect the publisher's boss and Cyril to be arrested too. Gloria pondered. She didn't say much. Instead, she asked, what's the family's reaction? Did grandfather say anything? It said that when the officers came to arrest them, Cyril and old Madam tried to resist violently. When Master arrived, he flew into a rage and slapped both Cyril and old Madam. He also announced that Family Moreton would not contribute a single cent to Cyril. Got it. You can leave now. Gloria nodded slightly. After the secretary left, she looked surprised. She knew that ever since her grandmother and Cyril's family fled to the north, her grandfather had been extremely displeased with them. However, she did not expect that he would slap her grandmother in public today and even threaten that he would not save Cyril. Her grandmother cared a lot about her reputation and doted on Cyril the most. Her grandfather had completely fallen out with her today. Of course, Gloria wouldn't believe that Meg was a scumbag. Otherwise, wasn't she pretty enough? She wasn't sure if Meg was behind this, but she felt that it was possible. Although Mr. Meg was gentle and generous, he wasn't someone who could be bullied by anyone. The fact that Cyril and Delmar were together meant that he had something to do with this rumor. This kind of counterattack was in line with his character. However, 30 million copper coins was not a small amount for her now. Not to mention Cyril, the prodigal son who could never save money. Now that her grandfather didn't want the family to help him, it was up to her grandmother to take out her private savings for the sake of her favorite son. "Serves you right," Gloria scolded softly. She covered her mouth and chuckled. She picked up her pen and continued to work. She didn't forget the ugly faces of Cyril's family when they wanted to drive her family out of Family Moreton. Although she had never thought of revenge, seeing them being punished still made her happy. The mayor's office was very efficient. In less than 3 days, Meg received the results of the case. Delmar returned the advance payment of 5 million copper coins and paid 6 million copper coins in cash. 2 houses and a publishing house under his name had been auctioned, and it was estimated that he could raise about 4 million copper coins. The remaining 20 million copper coins would not be enough to fill the remaining debt. Cyril's situation was even worse. So far, he had only paid 500,000 copper coins. However, through the mayor's office, they said that old Mrs. Denise of Family Moreton wanted to see him and talk face to face. Matt expressed that he didn't want to see that old witch and asked the city lord's castle to inform her on his behalf. 30 million copper coins, not a single cent less. Pay up in 3 days. Otherwise, I'll let your obedient son rot in jail. That was how arrogant he was when he had a backer. If Jeffrey came out, he might have a chance to wrestle with him. Now that his father didn't care about his silly son, why should he be polite? He also learned that Delmar had a wife and 2 children, an 8-year-old son and a 4.5-year-old daughter. Going bankrupt was not a small punishment. Meg had already expressed his willingness to forgive Delmar, but this matter would not be announced until Cyril paid the money. Bastard! Old Mrs. Denise threw the quilt in her hand to the ground. She was so angry that her face turned red. She cursed, "This bastard is too much." Several maids were trembling, not daring to interrupt. Aviva was sobbing with her 2 daughters at the side, and she lamented, "Mother, you have to save Cyril. You love him the most. If he stays in jail for the rest of his life, what are we going to do? Grandmother, I beg you to save father. Please, I beg you." Heidi and Herney also hugged Dennis's arms and begged, one on the left and one on the right. Ever since Gloria came to power, their lives had already been difficult enough. Now that Cyril had been arrested, their pillar of support was gone, and they didn't know what to do at all. Holding her granddaughters in her arms, Denise burst into tears too. She beat her chest and stamped her feet. "I want to save my son too, but how can I afford 30 million? I've only saved about 10 million copper coins after all these years. Even if I sell all the shops and houses under my name, I'll still be short of 10 million. What should we do?" Aviva cried. "If you ask me, there are only 2 solutions." Aurora, who had been sitting on the side, smiled. "What solutions do you have?" Aviva asked. Denise also looked over. 30 million copper coins is not a small amount. Father clearly doesn't want to spend money or effort. He's leaving second brother to die. Aurora smiled. "If you ask me, we don't need to spend money or effort. Let him stay in jail for a few years. We don't need to give the 30 million to that bastard. We'll keep it for you and your daughters. At least you'll have someone to rely on." Aviva and her 2 daughters were moved. They didn't say anything. "Bullshit. How can I let my son suffer like this?" Denise flew into a rage. "Then there's only the second solution. Mother, if father doesn't help, you can only ask your family." Aurora shrugged. Chapter 2354. This farce made Amy's and Meg's appearances in the entertainment industry, but it gave him another wave of fans and solidified his image as a good man. The increase in fans could be seen from the number of followers he had. He was now an internet celebrity with close to 1 million followers. 1 million followers sounded impressive, but compared to the tens of millions of followers he had in his previous life, it was still a far cry. However, the quality of his fans in this life was very high. It was not comparable to the anti-fans in his previous life who added him to their follower list because they were afraid they could not find him. Ding! System mission issued. Please complete the 1 million followers achievement as soon as possible. After the mission is completed, you will receive a special reward. Mission progress. 986,520 followers. At this moment, the system's voice, which had disappeared for a long time, suddenly sounded in Meg's mind. 1 million followers achievement? A small reward? Meg pursed his lips. He was not looking forward to it. A mysterious reward is a mysterious reward. The richness of the reward is far beyond your imagination. Please work hard to complete the mission and continue to work toward your goal of becoming the god of cookery. The system began its daily encouragement. I think about teaching people how to cook every day and think of ways to attract fans. Why is it so difficult to get more fans? Meg frowned and thought seriously for a while. Why don't I change my method and go out to the restaurants? Anti-fans are still fans. This will come faster. The system solemnly warns the host that if you accumulate too many negative emotions, it may lead to another transmigration or death. I think the host does not want this to happen again. You won't meet such a daughter and wife every time you transmigrate, the system said faintly. Meg tilted his head and thought about it. He did not want to experience this again. What if I can't become the god of cookery? What will happen? Meg asked again. If you are lucky, the host can live to 130 or 140 years old. This is the record for the longest lifespan since the appearance of humans on the Northern continent. Before that, the host will become old, impotent, weak, paralyzed, and incontinent. At the same time, your daughter can still maintain the mentality of a young girl, and your wife can still be young and beautiful. Perhaps in a few decades, she will slowly forget about you and then meet. Shut up. Meg's expression didn't look too good. Humans had the shortest lifespan among all the races on the Northern continent. Even 10th-tier powerhouses would be considered very old if they could live to the age of 90. It was really not bad. It was worth it to pretend. After all, he had a lot of books and had a complete set. The elves' basic lifespan was 1,000 years. As their strength increased, their lifespan would also increase accordingly. It was not unusual for a peak 10th-tier powerhouse like Irina to live up to 2,000 years old. Although Amy was a mixed blood, she had inherited Irina's beauty and many elven characteristics, so her lifespan would also be very long. As for Anne, Meg suspected that she was also immortal. As for Xiaoguai, she was a divine child who was going to become a god. Once she regained her divinity, she would probably be an immortal existence. Therefore, in the future, he might not only be the weakest in the family, but he might also have the shortest life in the family. Why am I so sad? I'm already a demigod? Meg couldn't figure it out. Isn't this demigod too useless? Meg scratched his head. If you don't become a god, you'll still be immortal. Do you really want to hear me say, System, please teach me how to become a god? Ahem. If the host wants to say that, then I can teach you too. Scram. Meg kept the tea set on the table and pushed the bicycle out. The bicycle stopped at a street not far from Aiden Square. This street was called Busey Street. The street was quite wide, and there were many shops on both sides. It was only 2 streets away from Aiden Square, but there were very few people here. There were a few repair, carpentry, and blacksmith shops on both sides of the street. These were all craftsmen, and they only treated this place as a workshop. They didn't expect there to be much traffic here. A week ago, Meg spent 500 million copper coins to buy half of Busey Street. He bought over 200 buildings of various sizes as long as they were intended to be sold. After that, he overturned the 50-odd buildings in the center of Busey Street, pulled up the fence, and started to build Mamie Square. He wanted to spread a sentence across the Northern continent. Wherever Mamie Square is, it's the center. Keep a low profile. He wasn't someone who flaunted his wealth. However, he did want to build a new commercial center outside of Aden Square and build the first Mamie cinema in this commercial center. The business district of Aden Square was already saturated. It would cost too much to buy a piece of land to build a cinema, and the price-performance ratio wasn't high. Meg had a taste of success when he invested in Romo Street in Rodu, so he planned to replicate it in Chaos City. Meg handed the blueprint to Ashley, and the Night Elves construction team had already finished the land leveling work. A forest had already sprouted from the ground in just a few days. The trees were tall, and some of them were already as thick as several people hugging around them. Meg's idea was to build a shopping mall with the elves' characteristics. It would be made of wood as the main material. Not only would it have a unique design, but it would also allow the residents of Chaos City to get to know this new group of residents from the Wind Forest. These trees were grown by plant-type magic casters. It wasn't a rare thing to use magic seeds together with the growth magic. There were quite a number of plant-type magic casters among the Night Elves. Hence, the planting of the raw materials was completed in just a few days. In the west corner, the elves had already started to chop down the trees. The thick tree trunks were cut into different sizes of wood and piled up neatly. That was one of the things that Mag admired about the elves. Not only were they efficient, they were also able to complete their work beautifully. Meg wheeled his bicycle around the construction site and happened to hear an old man at the side lamenting, "The elves' magic is really amazing. These trees were just planted a few days ago, and they've grown so big in just a few days. If we sell the wood in the city, we'll make a fortune." This old man knows how to make money. Meg praised in his heart. This was another good job for the Night Elves. The construction of Mamie Square was not a small investment. Meg estimated that he would have to invest another $500 million. He had chatted with Xiaomi's investor yesterday and pulled in an angel investment. It was just enough. Apart from Chaos City, Meg also had a construction site on Romo Street in Chaos City at this moment. However, that construction site was much smaller. Only 3 buildings were built, and only a cinema was built. It was contracted to a local construction team, so the efficiency was much lower. During this period of time, Meg planned to go to various big cities, especially some second-tier cities in the Roth Empire. Although they weren't as famous as Rodu, they had a huge population and were also very suitable to set up a cinema. Chapter 2355. Meg's movie ambitions were beginning to take shape, but Meg wasn't sure how far this new thing could go. However, since Vicky's opera could become popular, it shouldn't be difficult to promote it in this world where entertainment was scarce. Spending dozens of copper coins to buy a ticket and watch a movie should be easy. As long as the habit of watching movies was developed, everything would be easy to handle. Meg didn't like to make movies. He simply wanted to become popular. If he became popular, he could prolong his life. He didn't want to pass on his wife and daughter to someone else after he reached 100 years old. He couldn't swallow that. 7 days passed in the blink of an eye after returning from Rodu. Meg ignored old Mistress Denise's constant attempts to please him and went straight to Rodu early in the morning. Vicky stared blankly at Meg for a long while with 2 rather obvious dark circles under her eyes. "Is it already 7 days?" "Yes, it's been 7 days today." Meg nodded with a smile, just like an editor who came to rush him for the first time. "Wait a moment, let me wash my face." Vicky slammed the door shut and then washed for an hour. Meg went to chat with Miss Effie for a while and then inspected the construction site of the movie theater and also checked if the businesses that had recently moved in were up to standard. After returning to the opera house, Vicky finally came out with a thick book after washing her face. "You haven't had your breakfast, right?" Mag placed a bowl of shaved noodles that he had just made in the kitchen of the tavern next door in front of Vicky. Grr! Before Vicky could say that she wasn't hungry, her stomach had already reported in advance. "Eat first, we'll talk after you eat." Meg smiled. He could tell that this lass had stayed up late to write her novel. "Then I won't stand on ceremony." Vicky picked up the chopsticks, held the bowl, and slurped down the shaved noodles. Her starving stomach received the best comfort, and her tiredness was immediately alleviated. It was even more effective than the water of life that had already developed drug resistance. "It's delicious," Vicky said vaguely as she pouted. Meg leaned against the chair and looked at the charmingly naive Vicky with a smile. This girl looked like a young lady with a high status. She was quite hard-working towards her work. Originally, he didn't have much hope this time, but looking at her, she should be almost done. The bowl of knife-shaved noodles was soon in Vicky's stomach. She even drank the soup until there was not a drop left. Putting down the bowl, Vicky still wanted more. She hadn't had such a delicious breakfast in a long time. "Another bowl, please," Vicky said without thinking. "Then I'll go and make you another bowl." Meg stood up. No, I was just kidding." Vicky hurriedly pulled him back, her face red. This was Alex. She wasn't that shameless. Meg sat down again. Vicky took the bowl to the side and handed over the thick book that she had brought out earlier. Finished. Meg took the book. The cover said, "Succubus Love." The script is mostly finished, but there are still many details to be optimized. Some dialogue also needs to be changed. Vicky nodded and said a little embarrassedly, especially the ending and climax. It was written in a hurry, so there is still a lot of room for improvement. Meg flipped open the table of contents and looked for a while. He could roughly see the direction of the story, but the content was still a little raw, and there was still a lot of room for improvement. Also, this was a script. Unlike the previous one, it was relatively less readable. Meg happened to have a talent that he could use when it came to optimization. Very good. It's already very good to be able to finish to this extent in such a short time. Meg closed the script and smiled. Then I'll take this script first. You continue to optimize the script. I'll find an author to adapt it into a movie and release it first. You're going to change it into a movie first? Vicky was a little surprised. Yes. After all, this is a brand new story. It's not realistic to directly attract the audience to the cinema, so I plan to adapt it into a movie first and try to make it explode in the industry. This way, the follow-up publicity will be twice the result with half the effort. Meg nodded. You're really far-sighted. Vicky looked at Meg with admiration. His understanding of business operations had indeed far surpassed hers. Don't worry. I'll show it to you after it's finished. I'll only publish it when you think it meets the requirements. Meg looked at Vicky and said, "This is your work after all. I'll fully respect your opinion." Vicky nodded with a smile. Her heart warmed. She was indeed touched. "Then I won't go to Rodu often. After you're done with the draft, send me a message directly. I'll come and get the script," Meg said as he was about to get up. Vicky stood up first. She looked at Meg and said, "Wait a minute, about the question of the actor. Are you sure you've already chosen someone? How's the acting?" Meg thought for a while and nodded. "I think the acting is not bad. It's just acting as you are." Vicky's expression was a little strange. Meg did seem to be acting as he was. After all, although he didn't kill the great old one, he did seal it. But who was a succubus? What about the succubus? Vicky asked. "That's an employee of my restaurant. She's quite talented in acting. However, after your reminder, I also feel that there's a need to send her to you to learn how to act so that she won't be a burden when it's time to go on stage." Meg nodded thoughtfully. "Actually, I have quite a wide range of acting roles." Vicky flipped her hair and tried to show an expression that she thought was charming. "You're still young. You have to grow up." Meg glanced at her and shook his head. "You can go. I'll give you the script when I'm done," Vicky said angrily as she got up to send him off. "Come over when you're free. I'll treat you to barbecue," Meg said with a smile as he got up and walked to the door. Vicky wanted to have some backbone and refuse, but when the words reached her mouth, they became, "All right, I'll definitely come." Barbecue was simply too delicious. It was irresistible. Meg returned to Chaos City with the script and then ran to Cynthia's house. He knocked on the door, and Cynthia looked at him with a yawn. She looked sleepy, as if she had just woken up. "Take this. This is the first work in your agreement." Meg handed the script over. "Succubus? What a tacky title," Cynthia said with disdain as she took the book with a frown. "What about Phantom of the God of Cookery?" Meg asked. "Even more tacky," Cynthia answered seriously as she looked at him. Meg was silent for a while before he said, "This was also given by that person. What genre is this? Is it a script for a play? It seems a little different." Cynthia asked doubtfully after flipping open the thick script and reading a few pages. Chapter 2356. This is a script, but it's not a script for a play, but for a magic movie. You'll know it later. Meg said with a smile. Your job this month is to adapt this script into a readable hit. Hit? Cynthia hesitated. I've only written one hit book in my life. As for what it is, you should know. Meg's expression stiffened. He didn't know. If it weren't for that, they wouldn't have known each other. Just follow the feeling of the book. The script has provided you with the framework and content of the story. You only need to add some details. Meg comforted her. Don't be too stressed. Follow the feeling? Cynthia thought carefully for a moment and lowered her head, blushing. She replied softly, I got it. Meg looked at Cynthia with a puzzled expression and worriedly said, in that case, you can submit a draft for me to take a look at in a week's time. I will control the content. Okay. Cynthia nodded. Meg didn't stay long. After he left Cynthia's house, he went to the mayor's house. Delmar's assets were being notarized these days, and the publishing house was the most difficult to deal with. The small publishing house had a dozen staff members and didn't have any outstanding works. The most famous Mr. Mac series had been banned and wasn't very valuable. So far, few people were bidding for it. Meg bought the company for 5 million copper coins. After all, no matter how much money he paid, it would be returned to him in the end. He had just earned a company for nothing. Mr. Mac, you're really taking drastic measures. I don't think any company will dare to spread rumors about you for a long time. Dicus accompanied Meg through the handover procedures and said with a smile, those who spread rumors have to pay the price. Meg smiled and cupped his hands at Dicus. Thank you. It's not a big deal. Such an illegal businessman should indeed be punished. It's better to intimidate the rascals. Dicus shook his head with a smile. I heard that Cyril is not going to pay the penalty? Meg asked. This morning, Madame Denise came in person and asked us to give them more time. She also wants to talk to Mr. Lev in person. It seems that she wants to reduce the price. Dicus shook his head with a smile. But that Mr. Lev insisted on 30 million copper coins, not a single cent less. It seems that he's determined to take a bite out of the Moreton family's fat meat. This kind of guy won't remember until I teach him a lesson. Meg smiled and said goodbye to Dicus before he went to Delmar Publishing. There was still a seal on the door of Delmar Publishing House. When Meg stopped his bicycle, he saw a middle-aged woman sitting on the steps in front of the door. Meg recognized this woman. She was the editor of Delmar Publishing House and was responsible for urging Cynthia to update. The female editor heard the voice and looked up at Meg. She seemed to recognize Meg and lowered her head in embarrassment, pretending not to know him. Rip. Meg stepped forward and tore off the seal on the door. You? What are you doing? The female editor couldn't sit still anymore. She stood up and looked at Meg in surprise. I'm the owner of this publishing house now. Seeing you sitting here in frustration, are you an employee of this publishing house? Meg looked at her with a smile. You're the owner of this publishing house. The female editor was completely stunned and looked at Meg in disbelief. Yes, the owner of the publishing house was involved in contract fraud and went bankrupt. The publishing house was auctioned in the city lord's mansion, and I got it. Meg nodded and took out the ownership transfer certificate of the city lord's mansion and showed it to the female editor. How could this be? The female editor was still dumbfounded. The publishing house closed all of a sudden. The owner was suddenly arrested, and the publishing house that was running well was shut down. All the employees were laid off. She hadn't come back to her senses until today. She hadn't received her salary last month and hadn't found a new job. She just happened to be in this area and sat at the door for a while. She didn't expect to meet Mr. Mac. Are you an employee of this publishing house? What did you do before? Meg asked again. I used to be an editor at this publishing house. I was responsible for accepting authors and proofreading books. The female editor quickly answered, My name is Eleanor. Meg looked at her and asked, So you're an editor? Then do you know the author called Lone Wolf of the Northwest? Eleanor's expression suddenly became a little embarrassed. She looked away and said vaguely, I've heard of this author, but I don't know her. I don't know what she looks like, where she lives, or what she likes to eat. I see. Meg nodded and said regretfully, I thought that the author was quite talented. If you know her, maybe you can help me get to know her and send me some razor blades or something. Eleanor pretended not to hear him and prepared to leave. It was too awkward to meet Mr. Mack. Eleanor, I'm planning to reopen this publishing house. However, I'm not very professional, and the publishing house is lacking manpower. Are you willing to join me? Meg looked at Eleanor and said with a smile. Eleanor was stunned. She looked up at Meg and asked, You mean you want me to continue working at Del Mar Publishing House? No, it's a brand new Mamie Publishing House, Meg said with a smile. Eleanor looked at Meg's gentle and kind smile, and her heart skipped a beat. She nodded almost without hesitation and said, I'm willing. Very good. Show me around this publishing house first. Meg pushed open the door. Introduce me to your former colleagues while you're at it. All right. Eleanor quickly followed and showed Meg around the publishing house. The most valuable asset of the publishing house was this house, which accounted for about 90% of the auction price. The publishing house had accumulated some works over the years, but they were all works that were not well known. They were barely surviving, let alone becoming popular. However, although it was small, it had all the essentials. This publishing house had all the staff and was fully capable of planning and publishing a book. After listening to Eleanor's relatively fair introduction of her former colleagues, Meg gave up on the idea of recruiting them back. He had no plans to publish a large number of works at the moment. His first work was still in the process of being polished, and he didn't need anyone's help in typesetting and printing. From today onwards, you'll be the company's deputy editor. Your monthly salary will be 6,000 copper coins, Meg said to Eleanor. Chapter 2357. Eleanor was secretly delighted. 6,000 copper coins was a full 2,000 copper coins higher than her previous salary, and Meg had even promoted her to the position of deputy editor. A promotion and a raise. She never thought that she would achieve her goal after her boss was arrested. Eleanor's fatigue was swept away, and she looked at Meg energetically and asked, Then what do I need to do? Meg thought for a while and said, For the next few days, you just need to come to the company every day and clean up the place. There's nothing for you to do for the time being. Huh? Eleanor was stunned. I'm preparing a book, but it hasn't reached the stage where I need a publisher yet, Meg explained. Eleanor nodded. Although she didn't know what Meg was preparing, as an obedient employee, she wouldn't ask if her boss didn't say anything. Also, find those employees who are owed wages and ask them to come here 3 days later at 10 o'clock in the morning to collect their wages. If they don't have a job, they can also prepare for interviews. I might be hiring a few new employees, Meg added. You want to give them back their wages? Eleanor was a little surprised. These old employees had already given up hope of getting back their wages. She didn't expect Meg to take the initiative to bring this up. Yes, I've received the company's assets, but I also have to bear the corresponding debts. This was the rules set before the auction. Meg nodded. I'll have to trouble you with this. No problem. I'll inform them. Eleanor nodded. These are the company keys. Take a bunch. Meg handed a bunch of keys to Eleanor. Eleanor was flattered and accepted it. In the past, only the managing editor had a second set of keys besides the boss. Work hard. There will be plenty of opportunities for promotions and raises in the future, Meg encouraged. Okay. Eleanor nodded heavily, but she thought to herself, there are only 2 of us in the company. Where else can I get promoted? Is this the reason why I added a deputy editor in front of my title? Meg looked up at the signboard. I'll get someone to tear it down in a moment, Eleanor said immediately. Meg looked at her and said, I'll make the signboard myself. You can just deal with this old one. Also, find someone to deal with the other things in the publishing house. Everything? Yes. I plan to renovate the publishing house. It's too outdated. Meg nodded. He thought of the uncomfortable sofa in his boss' office. All right. Eleanor swallowed her words back into her stomach. She thought that the new boss was indeed generous. Back then, Del Mar, that old miser, had been mending and mending a broken sofa for 3 years. The office appliances of the employees were all bought from the second-hand market. Meg nodded and rode away on his bicycle. It was good to have an obedient employee. It would be annoying to have a commander without an army. Now that he had a publishing company, the printing could be handled by the night elves. Now, he only lacked the finished product of an explosive book. Meg still had some confidence in Cynthia's strength. Meg returned to the restaurant. From afar, he saw a girl standing at the entrance of the restaurant. She was looking up at a pear tree that had bloomed at the entrance. "Teacher Luna, why are you here?" Meg asked with a smile as he stopped his bicycle and looked at Luna, who was wearing a cotton dress. "You're back." Luna turned to look at Meg with a gentle smile on her face. "I'm here to discuss with Mr. Meg about starting classes. The children have been attending classes for a week, and the effect of the enlightenment is good. After our discussion, we feel that we can start some practical classes to let the children experience and adapt. Then let's go in and talk. The restaurant is not open today." Meg opened the door and went in. Luna followed him in. Seeing Meg coming out of the kitchen with tea, she asked casually, "Is the madam not home?" "She has something to do." Meg placed a cup of warm water in front of Luna. "Oh, that's a bit unfortunate. I think she should be a very beautiful woman." "Yes, a very beautiful woman." Meg nodded with a smile. Luna smiled faintly and took out a class schedule and placed it on the table. "Take a look at the class schedule. I have arranged 2 classes a week for you, one on Monday and one on Friday. The class duration is 2 hours. What do you think? If there's no urgent matter, I guarantee full attendance." Meg nodded with a smile. Luna's schedule avoided the restaurant's working hours and left some time for him. It could be said that she was very thoughtful. As for the 2-hour duration of each class, Meg was the one who had suggested it. Learning to cook was different from learning in class. It was about practice. Without enough practice time, even if you were a genius, it would be difficult to become an excellent chef. Meg only had 2 classes a week, which added up to less than 4 hours. If he wanted to nurture an excellent chef, this amount of time was far from enough. However, Meg liked to accept challenges. He wanted to make a group of little fellows fall in love with cooking and nurture them into the best chefs on the Northern continent in the future. He wanted to make Hope School the Huangpu Military Academy of the culinary world. Just thinking about it made his blood boil. "Are we selecting students tomorrow?" Meg asked. "Yes. We have already informed the children of the various practical classes and let them choose to sign up voluntarily." Luna nodded with a smile. "The number of children who chose your God of Cookery Advanced course is the highest. There are more than 400 of them. I'm actually so popular." Meg was a little surprised. He thought that learning to cook was a tough and tiring thing, and the children would not like it the most. "These children are scared of being poor. If they become chefs, at least they won't have to worry about going hungry," Luna said softly with a pitiful look in her eyes. Meg's heart also tightened. He recalled the time when he had just transmigrated to this world. Amy hugged the hard and coarse biscuits and chewed them with relish. Some children had a tougher life than that. "I can only take in 100 students in the first class. It seems like I have to be ruthless and eliminate a lot of children," Meg said with a smile. "What are your requirements?" "We can eliminate some children first to reduce your workload tomorrow," Luna asked. Meg thought for a while and said, "Children who are too young can't reach the stove and can't carry the pot. Therefore, in terms of height and strength, I will limit it to 1. 3 meters and a pot that can hold half a pot of water with one hand. As for the rest, I will decide after I see the children." Luna nodded and took out a pen and paper to record. Luna put away the pen and paper and looked at Meg with concern. "I heard that you encountered a rumor-spreading incident recently. Have you settled it?" Chapter 2358. Luna didn't stay at Amy's for long before leaving. Meg took out a small notebook and started to prepare for his lessons seriously. The good thing was that he didn't have to worry about the lack of students. This kind of start was a little beyond his expectations. This meant that he was about to gain 100 loyal fans. And these 100 loyal fans could bring him even more rewards in the future. But before that, what he had to do was to learn how to be a good teacher and teach them his culinary skills so that they could grow into independent chefs. Eliminating some children who were very curious about this made Meg a little uneasy. Meg went to the dormitory and found Angela, who had just returned from outside. He said, Angela, go to Rodu. Go to Romo Street and find the leader of the Black Cat Opera House, Miss Vicky. Tell her that I recommended you to learn how to perform. Learn how to perform? Angela was stunned. She looked at Meg with a puzzled expression. Why do I have to learn how to perform? Didn't I say that I was going to give you a chance to become famous? Now that I've given you the chance, it's up to you to grasp it, Meg said with a smile. Angela blinked and said, Boss, you didn't sell me, did you? Sold me to an opera house? The kind that's not very serious? Thump. Meg reached out and gave her chestnut. He snapped. A serious opera house. It's the best opera house on the Norland continent now. Angela held her red forehead and said with an aggrieved expression, Then why do you want me to learn how to perform? I don't know how to sing operas. I plan to shoot a magic movie, and you'll be the female lead. The script is currently being polished, but you need to improve your acting skills. After all, it's the first step in a magic movie. Don't make it awkward, Meg explained patiently. What's a magic movie? It's a transmission technique that uses a photo stone and magic to save the image, and then uses a player to play it. The content of the film is a story. That's a magic movie. Angela thought about it seriously for a while. She didn't understand, but it sounded awesome. She couldn't help but ask, if I'm the female lead, who's the male lead? Meg pointed at himself. Angela stared at Meg for a while and said with uncertainty, Boss, are you coveting my beauty? Do you think you can say that in front of Lady Boss? Meg rolled his eyes. Angela immediately felt that it was very reasonable. She smiled and said, That's right, you don't have the guts. Lady Boss can crush you to death 100 times with one finger. Meg's mood was a little complicated. This was a situation caused by the strong woman and the weak man. She even felt that he didn't dare to have any thoughts. If I go, what about my job at the restaurant? Angela asked. You don't have to worry about that. I'll be a little busy, but it's not to the point where I can't handle it. Are you trying to say that it doesn't matter if I'm there or not? With you around, everyone can rest a little longer. I'm leaving tonight. Angela ran upstairs angrily. Meg shook his head with a smile and turned to go back to the restaurant. After a while, another head popped out from upstairs and asked timidly, Is it difficult to learn acting? It shouldn't be difficult for you, Meg said with a smile. This girl's acting talent should be maxed out. It was natural. Then I'm relieved. Angela retracted her head with a smile. The next morning, Angela came to the restaurant for breakfast and bade farewell to everyone solemnly. Angela finished the tofu pudding in her bowl and then said with a little smugness, Sisters, I'm going to Rodu to eat and drink. When I become a big star, I'll come back to visit you guys. Amy tilted her head and asked Meg, Father, is big sister Angela going to learn hypnotism? The corner of Meg's mouth twitched, and he almost laughed out loud. He shook his head slightly and said, She's going to learn acting. She's determined to be the first benchmark for succubi to leave the bathing center. Amy nodded thoughtfully. Wouldn't that be separating herself from the masses? Everyone laughed when they heard that. Oh yes, Barbara, Shirley, how's your lesson preparation coming along? Meg asked the two of them. Principal Luna came to look for me yesterday. She said that there are very few children with magic talent. Currently, there are only 20-odd students who can cultivate magic. Barbara sighed softly. Although I haven't seen those children yet, I think their talent shouldn't be too good. Otherwise, they would have been accepted by Chaos School long ago. Meg had expected that too. Seeing that Barbara wasn't very enthusiastic, he seriously said, Education is non-discriminatory. If they're willing to learn magic from you, as the only magic teacher in Hope School, you should still do your best to teach them. Barbara's expression also became more serious when she heard that. She nodded and said, I know. I just didn't expect the percentage to be so low. Maybe they didn't test it correctly. After all, there aren't any magic casters among those teachers. Many children's magic talent needs to be developed before it can be revealed to the outside world. Therefore, many children with magic talent might be buried because no one noticed it, Irina interrupted. Barbara's eyes lit up, and she was instantly filled with enthusiasm. That's true. Then, wait for me to slowly discover it. There are over 3,000 children from different races. I don't believe that only a few of them can learn magic. Shirley, what about you? Meg looked at Shirley. Principal Luna said that only 4 children have signed up for the archery class so far. Shirley's smile had a hint of helplessness. She glanced at Anna, who was eating a bun obediently beside her. One of them is Anna. Why don't children nowadays like to strengthen their bodies? Why didn't anyone sign up for such a good archery teacher? Yabamiya asked curiously. This isn't hard to understand. These children used to live a hard life without enough food. To them, being able to find a job that can make them rich after leaving school is much more important than strengthening their bodies, Meg explained. Everyone was deep in thought. They quickly understood what Meg meant. However, they probably didn't realize that if they learn archery from Shirley, they can also become excellent hunters. It can be considered a freelance job, Elizabeth said. There's a 1-week experiential period for choosing the class. During this period, the children can make changes according to their own abilities and preferences. When they know that the archery class is interesting, the number of students will increase, Meg comforted. Boss, how many students have signed up for your class? Yabamiya asked. Everyone also looked at Meg. Chapter 23:59. Meg coughed softly and calmly said, There are only about 400. It's a little too many people, so I had to trouble Principal Luna and the rest to help me screen out some of them. After today, I still have to eliminate some more students. It's also a kind of trouble to have too many choices. Barbara stared at Meg for a while. She was about to curse, but she suppressed it with her princess upbringing. Shirley also looked at Meg with a complicated expression. Although she didn't say anything, she seemed to have cursed a lot. Impressive. I didn't expect so many children to want to be chefs, Yabamiya said in surprise. These children are quite smart. They don't have to worry about filling their stomachs when they're in the kitchen, Camilla said with a smile. These children have to get rid of this feeling of insecurity. Only then can they really settle down to learn and choose their future, Irina said with some worry. Meg was slightly taken aback when he heard that. Irina's words enlightened him. Although these children had chosen him, how many of them really wanted to be chefs? Or did they just want to get rid of their hunger? Meg's original intention of investing in Hope School was to give these children a chance to choose their future. I'm full. I have to go. The flying mount I booked is about to depart. Angela put down her bowl, stood up, and said to everyone, Then goodbye, sisters. You and I are not sisters, Meg emphasized. It's okay. I don't mind, Angela said with a smile. I mind, Meg said solemnly. Angela waved her hand and went out. Boss, the restaurant hasn't released any new products recently. The customers are asking me about new products. Yabamiya looked at Meg and asked, Have you been too busy recently? Meg was taken aback when he heard that. He had been busy with his side business recently and had indeed neglected his main business. He said with a smile, Actually, I prepared a few new products. It's just that I've been too busy recently and haven't had the time to release them. The hot dry noodles hadn't been served yet, and the mousse cake series hadn't been launched yet. The hot dry noodles could be launched in the next 2 days, but Meg was still considering the mousse cake. This thing was a little different from ice cream. It made Meg feel a little strange to put it on the menu of the restaurant. I will release a new dish of noodles in the next 2 days, Meg said to Mia. Okay. Mia nodded. Mia, this is the timetable. As my assistant, come with me to Hope Academy for classes after the opening hours. Meg handed a timetable to Mia. Okay. Mia took the timetable, looked at it carefully, and then put it away carefully. I want to go to class too. Xiao Guai swallowed the bun in his mouth, looked at Meg, and begged, Father, I want to go to class too. Xiao Guai also wants to go to class with Sister Amy and Sister Anna. Xiao Guai is still young. You can go to school when you grow up a little, Meg said with a smile. No, Xiao Guai wants to go to class. Xiao Guai also wants to learn. Xiao Guai shook his head. Mama said that knowledge is a very important thing. It's even more important than food. Meg looked at this little being helplessly. This little guy was really too young. He was only about 2 years old. He was still wobbling when he walked. If he wanted to go to school at this age, wouldn't he be making things difficult for the teachers? Xiao Guai, be good. Mama will send you to school when you are 1 year older, Gina said gently as she patted Xiao Guai's head dotingly. Xiao Guai pouted, and his delicate and cute eyebrows squeezed together. He sniffed and looked at Gina with a wronged expression. Mama, is Xiao Guai very stupid? Is that why father doesn't let Xiao Guai go to class? Meg, he was very innocent. He simply felt that Xiao Guai was still young and not suitable to go to school. How can that be? Xiao Guai is the smartest. Shall I take you to learn magic? It's just next door. I'll ask my master to teach you magic. Amy slid down the chair and ran to Xiao Guai. She snapped her fingers, and a ball of icy blue flame appeared on her fingertip. Just like this. Wow. Xiao Guai stopped messing around immediately. His eyes were full of light. Then she followed Mi's example and snapped her fingers. Boom! A crack ran through the ceiling, and the entire restaurant shook violently. The restaurant fell silent instantly. Everyone looked at Xiao Guai in shock. On the other hand, Meg's eyelids were twitching wildly. System, your broken house isn't very sturdy, Meg complained in his mind. Host, the restaurant's defense level is level 10, and the attack just now has already exceeded level 10, so it's very reasonable for such a situation to occur, the system explained seriously. Meg was silent. What the fuck? There really wasn't anything wrong with it. If it weren't for Xiao Guai's cute and obedient appearance, he would have thought that Thanos had snapped his fingers. It seems like the restaurant should be renovated. I didn't think about it thoroughly when I renovated it. I didn't tear down the original broken house. Looks like it's still not very good. Meg smiled and tried to smooth things over. Everyone was enlightened when they heard that. It made sense. Xiao Guai was so small. How could he make a crack in the house with just a flick of his finger? What if there isn't? Xiao Guai looked at his finger in confusion. Then, he wanted to snap it again. It's not like that. Gina quickly reached out to stop Xiao Guai from snapping his finger a second time. She held Xiao Guai's hand gently with one hand and gently said, Xiao Guai, raise your hand slowly. Look at your palm, and then imagine the shape of water. Whoosh! A huge wave appeared in the restaurant out of thin air and rushed toward the dining table. Stop! Barbara raised her finger. The huge wave stopped and didn't pour down directly. Looking at the huge wave surging above their heads, everyone's expression was no longer calm. Is the Enlightenment education now so dangerous? Yabamiya swallowed his saliva. What kind of terrifying talent is this? Is this the legendary latecomer? Camilla was also dumbfounded. This level of magic was close to a level 7 major strength. Gina was only teaching Xiao Guai to try to feel the existence of water elements. Fun. Xiao Guai looked up at the huge wave above her head and clapped his little hands excitedly. Gina quickly waved her hand to stop the huge wave. She said embarrassedly, Did I scare everyone? Yes, I did. Barbara nodded. She looked at Xiao Guai and seriously said, I can't believe I felt pressure from a little girl. I was scared too. I feel so useless. Phyllis nodded. She realized that she couldn't withstand the huge wave just now. This is what a genius is, Irina said with a smile. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.